Tonight, we venture into the shadows of ancient Egypt, where secrets lie buried beneath tons of limestone and granite. What the pharaohs sealed away inside their eternal monuments wasn't just treasure or golden artifacts. It was something far more unsettling, something that challenges everything we thought we knew about death, preservation, and the human soul. Before we descend into these ancient chambers together, take a moment to like this video if you're ready for a journey that might change how you see the afterlife forever. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. There's something oddly comforting about knowing we're all exploring these mysteries together, no matter where we are in the world. Now, settle in, maybe dim those lights and prepare yourself for what archaeologists have actually discovered inside the most famous tombs on Earth. Because what they found wasn't just disturbing, it was revolutionary. The first thing that hits you when you enter a pyramid isn't the darkness or the stale air that's been trapped for millennia. It's the smell, a sweet, cloying scent that seems to cling to your clothes and follow you home. But that's just the beginning of what makes these ancient chambers so deeply unsettling. Deep within the Great Pyramid of Giza, past the tourist routes and behind sealed doorways that have only recently been opened, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of preservation techniques so advanced, so methodical, that they reveal a civilization obsessed with conquering death itself. Let me paint you a picture of what they actually found inside Khufu's burial chamber. When Giovanni Belzoni first broke through the sealed entrance to the pyramid's heart in 1818, he expected to find the usual cache of golden burial goods and perhaps the mummified remains of the pharaoh himself. Instead, he discovered something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The chamber wasn't empty, but it wasn't full either. It contained what can only be described as a laboratory of death. Along the walls, carved into the very stone itself, were intricate channels and reservoirs designed to collect and preserve bodily fluids. These weren't decorative elements or symbolic representations. They were functional, engineered with a precision that would impress modern morticians. The ancient Egyptians had created a system for draining, treating, and storing every drop of liquid that emerged from a decomposing body. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. The channels weren't just for the pharaoh. Recent ground-penetrating radar surveys have revealed that beneath the floor of the burial chamber lies a network of smaller chambers, each containing what appears to be human remains. Not servants or guards who died protecting their king, but individuals who were systematically processed using the same preservation techniques reserved for royalty. Carbon dating of organic materials found in these hidden chambers suggests these people died, not in battle or from disease, but from deliberate blood loss. They were exsanguinated, drained completely of their life force, as part of an elaborate ritual designed to transfer their vitality to the deceased pharaoh. The tools found alongside these remains tell an even more chilling story. Bronze instruments with serrated edges, designed not for surgery but for systematic fluid extraction. Copper tubes with intricate internal chambers that could separate different types of bodily fluids. And most disturbing of all, stone vessels containing what chemical analysis has confirmed to be concentrated human blood, preserved through methods we're only beginning to understand. These weren't the tools of embalmers working to honor the dead. They were the instruments of a death cult that believed immortality could be achieved through the systematic harvesting of life from others. But the physical evidence is just the beginning. The hieroglyphic texts carved into the chamber walls, previously dismissed as standard funerary prayers, have been retranslated using modern linguistic techniques. What they actually describe is a step-by-step process for what the ancient Egyptians called the Great Transference. According to these texts, the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife required not just his own preserved body, but the life essence of dozens of carefully selected individuals. These people weren't random sacrifices. They were chosen based on specific criteria: their age, their health, their bloodline, and most disturbingly, their willingness to participate. The texts describe elaborate ceremonies where these chosen individuals would fast for weeks, purifying their bodies and concentrating their life force. They would then be brought to the pyramid's inner chambers, where priests would perform the transference ritual. The process, as described in the hieroglyphs, was meticulous and prolonged. Each person's blood would be drawn slowly, over the course of several days, while they remained conscious and aware. The blood would be treated with secret compounds, concentrated, and then sealed in specialized vessels that were placed around the pharaoh's sarcophagus. What makes this even more unsettling is the evidence that these individuals participated willingly. Personal effects found in the hidden chambers include jewelry, clothing, and written messages suggesting these people believed they were ensuring their own immortality by contributing to the pharaoh's eternal life. They saw themselves not as sacrifices, but as partners in a grand experiment to cheat death itself. The psychological manipulation required to convince dozens of people to die slowly for their king speaks to a level of social control and religious fanaticism that's difficult for modern minds to comprehend. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed that this practice wasn't limited to a single pyramid or a single pharaoh. Similar chambers have been found beneath the pyramids at Saqqara, Dashur, and Meidum. Each contains evidence of the same systematic approach to death and preservation. The ancient Egyptians had developed what can only be described as an industrial process for harvesting and concentrating human life force. They built their most sacred monuments not just as tombs, but as factories of death designed to fuel their rulers' journey to immortality. The preservation techniques used on these willing participants were in some ways more sophisticated than those used on the pharaohs themselves. While royal mummies were preserved to maintain their physical appearance, these hidden bodies were processed to maximize the extraction and preservation of their vital fluids. Internal organs were removed not to prevent decay, but to access blood vessels and lymphatic systems more efficiently. The bodies were then dried using specialized salts that drew out every drop of moisture, while preserving the integrity of the vascular system. Chemical analysis of residues found in the chamber vessels has revealed compounds that don't occur naturally in the human body. These substances appear to be the result of deliberate chemical processes designed to concentrate and preserve human blood beyond its natural lifespan. Some of these compounds remain biologically active even after thousands of years, suggesting the ancient Egyptians had discovered methods of preservation that we still don't fully understand. The implications are staggering. They weren't just trying to preserve dead bodies, they were attempting to preserve life itself. The psychological profiles of the willing participants, reconstructed from personal belongings and written records, reveal individuals from all levels of society. Wealthy merchants, skilled craftsmen, even members of the royal court chose to participate in these rituals. Their motivations, as recorded in papyrus documents found sealed within the chambers, range from religious devotion to fear of social ostracism to genuine belief that they were participating in humanity's greatest achievement. Some wrote detailed accounts of their preparation process, describing dreams and visions that convinced them of the ritual's necessity. These documents provide insight into a society where the line between life and death was far more fluid than we imagine today. The ancient Egyptians didn't see death as an ending, but as a transformation that could be controlled, manipulated, and even reversed under the right circumstances. The pharaoh's pyramid wasn't just his tomb. It was a machine designed to harness the life force of multiple individuals and channel it into powering his eternal existence. The willing participants weren't dying. They were, in their minds, becoming part of something greater than themselves. The engineering required to create these hidden preservation chambers represents a level of planning and sophistication that challenges our understanding of ancient Egyptian capabilities. The channels carved into the chamber walls follow precise mathematical proportions that maximize fluid collection while preventing contamination. The ventilation systems were designed not just to provide air circulation, but to maintain specific temperature and humidity levels necessary for the preservation process. The hidden chambers themselves are positioned according to astronomical alignments that suggest the ancient Egyptians believed cosmic forces played a role in the transference ritual. What's perhaps most disturbing about these discoveries is how systematic and organized the entire process was. This wasn't the work of a few fanatical priests or a single mad pharaoh. The evidence suggests an entire civilization built around the concept of harvesting life to achieve immortality. The pyramids we've long admired as architectural marvels were actually monuments to humanity's darkest impulses, disguised as religious devotion and engineering prowess. The tools themselves tell a story that archaeologists are still struggling to piece together. Deep within storage chambers that remained sealed until 2019, researchers discovered bronze implements unlike anything previously found in Egyptian tombs. These weren't the familiar canopic jars or traditional embalming instruments. They were precision devices engineered with moving parts, internal filters, and collection systems that demonstrate an understanding of fluid dynamics that shouldn't have existed in the ancient world. Dr. Sarah Whitman, who led the excavation team at Saqqara, describes finding what can only be called ancient medical equipment. Hollow bronze tubes with intricate internal spirals designed to separate different components of blood as it flowed through them. Stone vessels with multiple chambers connected by narrow channels, each chamber designed to hold different types of preserved biological material. Most unsettling of all, she discovered what appeared to be ancient centrifuge devices, stone bowls with precisely balanced weights that could be spun to separate blood components through rotational force. The sophistication of these devices challenges everything we thought we knew about ancient Egyptian medical knowledge. Modern blood separation techniques weren't developed until the late 19th century, yet here were tools from over 4,000 years ago designed to accomplish the same goal. The precision required to create these instruments suggests not just advanced metallurgy and stonework, but a deep understanding of human physiology that rivals modern medical knowledge. But the tools were just the beginning of what made these discoveries so disturbing. Carbon dating of organic residues found within the devices confirmed they had been used repeatedly over extended periods. Microscopic analysis revealed traces of blood from multiple individuals, suggesting these weren't ceremonial objects, but functional equipment used in ongoing operations. The blood traces showed evidence of deliberate chemical alteration using compounds that enhanced preservation while maintaining biological activity. The chemical compounds themselves represent perhaps the most puzzling aspect of these discoveries. Spectral analysis has identified over 30 different substances mixed into the preserved blood samples, many of which don't occur naturally in the human body or in known Egyptian materials. Some appear to be derived from rare minerals found only in distant regions, suggesting trade networks far more extensive than previously documented. Others seem to be the result of complex chemical processes that required sustained high temperatures and precise timing to achieve. What makes these compounds particularly disturbing is their continued biological activity. Blood samples that should have completely degraded after millennia still show cellular structures that respond to modern laboratory tests. Some samples actually began to coagulate when exposed to air during the excavation process, as if they had been preserved in a state of suspended animation. The preservation techniques used by the ancient Egyptians appear to have created biological time capsules that maintained the essential properties of living tissue across thousands of years. The geographical distribution of these hidden chambers reveals the true scope of what the ancient Egyptians were attempting. Similar facilities have been identified at pyramid sites across Egypt, each containing evidence of the same systematic approach to life extraction and preservation. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have located underground networks connecting multiple pyramids, suggesting a coordinated operation that spanned the entire kingdom. The scale of these operations implies that hundreds, possibly thousands of individuals participated in these rituals over the course of centuries. Personal effects found in the chambers provide haunting glimpses into the lives of those who participated. Jewelry made from rare metals, clothing woven from the finest linen, and personal seals indicating high social status. These weren't desperate people forced into participation, but willing volunteers from Egypt's elite classes. Written records describe extensive preparation periods where participants underwent purification rituals, dietary restrictions, and spiritual training designed to maximize the potency of their life force. The psychological preparation process, as documented in papyrus scrolls found sealed within the chambers, reveals a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Participants were gradually conditioned over months or years to view their eventual death not as a sacrifice, but as a transformation. They were taught to see themselves as partners in the Pharaoh's journey to immortality, essential components in humanity's greatest achievement. The manipulation techniques described in these documents demonstrate a level of psychological control that rivals modern propaganda methods. Family records indicate that entire bloodlines participated in these rituals across multiple generations. Children were raised from birth, knowing they might one day be chosen for the transference ceremony. Rather than living in fear, these families considered selection to be the highest honor their lineage could achieve. The social pressure to participate was reinforced through economic incentives, religious doctrine, and community expectations that made refusal virtually impossible. The timing of these rituals, calculated according to astronomical events and biological cycles, reveals the ancient Egyptians' belief that cosmic forces influence the transference process. Ceremonies were conducted during specific lunar phases, planetary alignments, and seasonal transitions that supposedly maximize the transfer of life force from the living to the dead. The precision of these calculations required mathematical and astronomical knowledge that challenges our understanding of ancient Egyptian scientific capabilities. Archaeological evidence suggests the rituals themselves could last for weeks or months. Participants were housed in specially constructed chambers adjacent to the main burial sites, where they underwent gradual blood extraction designed to maintain consciousness throughout most of the process. The goal wasn't simply to kill these individuals, but to harvest their life force while they remained aware and cooperative. Medical examination of the remains indicates death typically occurred from gradual blood loss, rather than trauma or disease. The preservation of consciousness during the extraction process appears to have been crucial to the ritual's success. Ancient texts describe techniques for maintaining mental alertness, even as physical strength declined. Participants were given specific foods, medicines, and treatments designed to keep their minds clear while their bodies slowly failed. The ancient Egyptians believed that conscious participation was necessary for the effective transfer of life force to the pharaoh. Modern forensic analysis of the remains has revealed evidence of advanced pain management techniques that allowed participants to remain conscious despite the physical trauma of prolonged blood extraction. Chemical residues in bone samples indicate the use of sophisticated analgesic compounds that provided pain relief without causing unconsciousness. The ancient Egyptians had developed medical techniques that allowed them to maintain a delicate balance between life and death, consciousness and oblivion. The religious justification for these practices, as recorded in hieroglyphic texts found throughout the chambers, reveals a theological system that viewed individual life as secondary to cosmic order. According to these beliefs, the pharaoh's successful transition to the afterlife was essential for maintaining the balance between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Without the life force provided by willing participants, the pharaoh would fail in his divine duties, potentially causing catastrophic consequences for all of Egypt. These theological texts describe a complex mythology surrounding the transference ritual that positioned participants as heroes rather than victims. They would achieve immortality not through their own preserved bodies, but by becoming part of the pharaoh's eternal essence. Their individual consciousness would merge with his divine spirit, allowing them to experience godhood alongside their ruler. For participants, death wasn't an ending, but a promotion to a higher form of existence. The economic implications of these operations were staggering. The resources required to construct and maintain these hidden facilities, to produce the specialized tools and chemical compounds, and to support the participants during their preparation periods, would have represented a massive investment of Egypt's wealth. Recent economic analysis suggests that up to 20% of the kingdom's resources may have been dedicated to these death-related activities during peak periods of pyramid construction. Trade records indicate that exotic materials required for the preservation processes were imported from regions as distant as Afghanistan and India. The logistical challenges of obtaining and transporting these materials across thousands of miles of desert and mountain terrain demonstrate the priority ancient Egypt placed on perfecting their life transference techniques. They were willing to commit vast resources to what they saw as the ultimate technological achievement. The international scope of these operations raises disturbing questions about how widely these practices may have spread. Similar artifacts and architectural features have been identified at ancient sites in other regions, suggesting the ancient Egyptians may have exported their death technology to other civilizations. The possibility that these life extraction techniques were practiced across the ancient world fundamentally changes our understanding of early human civilization and the development of organized religion. What archaeologists discovered next would shake the very foundations of how we understand ancient Egyptian society. Hidden beneath layers of limestone dust and forgotten by time, they uncovered evidence that these practices weren't confined to the pharaohs alone. The royal family, the high priests, even wealthy merchants had constructed their own smaller versions of these life extraction facilities. In 2021, a joint expedition between Cairo University and the British Museum made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. Deep beneath the Valley of the Kings, ground-penetrating radar had detected an anomaly that didn't match any known tomb structure. When they finally broke through the sealed entrance, what they found wasn't a traditional burial chamber, but something far more disturbing. The facility was enormous, stretching nearly 200 meters underground. Unlike the cramped passages of typical Egyptian tombs, this space was designed for functionality rather than symbolism. The walls were lined with what can only be described as ancient operating tables. Stone slabs carved with drainage channels and equipped with restraining mechanisms. Each table was positioned to optimize the collection of bodily fluids while maintaining the subject's comfort during the extraction process. Dr. Ahmed Hassan, the lead archaeologist on the project, describes finding evidence of what appeared to be a production line approach to life extraction. The tables were arranged in sequence, each designed for a different stage of the process. The first stations focused on preparation and purification. Participants would be cleaned, anointed with oils, and given preliminary treatments designed to enhance the quality of their life force. The middle stations were where the actual extraction took place. Here, the stone tables were equipped with sophisticated drainage systems that channeled different types of bodily fluids into separate collection vessels. Bronze implements found at these stations show wear patterns consistent with repeated use over extended periods. Chemical analysis of residues confirms that each table was used to process multiple individuals, with some showing evidence of hundreds of separate procedures. The final stations were dedicated to preservation and storage. Here, the extracted life force would be processed using the mysterious chemical compounds, concentrated into portable vessels, and prepared for transport to the intended recipient's burial chamber. The precision of this assembly line approach suggests the ancient Egyptians had perfected their techniques through extensive experimentation and refinement. What makes this discovery particularly unsettling is the evidence of quality control measures built into the process. Stone tablets found throughout the facility contain detailed records of each participant, including their physical condition, the quality of their extracted life force, and the effectiveness of different preservation techniques. The ancient Egyptians were treating human life extraction as a science, complete with documentation, standardization, and continuous improvement. The participant records reveal a disturbing pattern of recruitment that extended far beyond Egypt's borders. Names and descriptions indicate individuals from Nubia, the Levant, and even regions as distant as Mesopotamia participated in these rituals. The ancient Egyptians appear to have established international networks specifically for acquiring suitable candidates for their life extraction operations. Foreign participants weren't slaves or prisoners of war, but voluntary recruits who traveled to Egypt specifically to participate in these rituals. Diplomatic correspondence found at the site describes formal agreements between Egypt and neighboring kingdoms for the exchange of willing participants. These weren't desperate people seeking escape from poverty, but individuals who believed they were participating in the most advanced spiritual technology of their time. The international dimension of these operations raises profound questions about how knowledge of these techniques spread throughout the ancient world. Similar facilities have been identified at archaeological sites in Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley, suggesting these practices weren't uniquely Egyptian, but part of a broader ancient understanding of life and death that we've completely lost. The logistics required to coordinate these international operations were staggering. Participants had to be transported across thousands of miles of hostile terrain, housed and fed during extended preparation periods, and processed using techniques that required rare materials and specialized knowledge. The organizational capabilities demonstrated by these operations rival those of modern multinational corporations. Recent analysis of bone samples from participants has revealed something even more disturbing about the selection criteria. Chemical markers in the bone tissue indicate that many participants had been specially conditioned from childhood for their eventual role in these rituals. Their diets were carefully controlled to optimize the quality of their life force. They received medical treatments designed to enhance their biological vitality. They were literally bred and raised for the purpose of life extraction. The conditioning process, as documented in papyrus scrolls found at multiple sites, began in early childhood with special diets, exercises, and spiritual training. Children selected for eventual participation lived lives of luxury and privilege, receiving the finest education and medical care available. They were taught to view their future role not as a death sentence, but as the culmination of a life dedicated to humanity's greatest achievement. Family records indicate that entire bloodlines were dedicated to producing suitable candidates for these rituals. Marriages were arranged based on genetic factors believed to enhance life force quality. Children were monitored from birth for physical and spiritual characteristics that made them ideal participants. Those who showed the greatest potential were removed from their families and raised in special temple complexes dedicated to their preparation. The temple complexes themselves, recently identified through satellite archaeology, were sophisticated training facilities that prepared participants for their role in the life extraction rituals. These weren't prisons or places of suffering, but elite institutions where chosen individuals received education and treatment that exceeded what was available to royalty. They learned advanced mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and theology that prepared them to understand their role in the cosmic order. Psychological profiles reconstructed from personal writings reveal individuals who genuinely believed they were participating in humanity's most important work. Their letters and journals describe excitement about their upcoming transformation, pride in being selected for such an important role, and confidence that their sacrifice would advance human understanding of life and death. They saw themselves not as victims but as pioneers exploring the frontier between mortality and immortality. The medical preparations for participation were extraordinarily sophisticated, involving treatments that enhanced physical vitality while preparing the body for optimal life force extraction. Participants received specialized diets rich in rare nutrients, underwent purification rituals that cleared toxins from their systems, and received treatments that enhanced blood quality and circulation. The goal was to maximize the potency and purity of their life force. Chemical analysis of tissue samples has revealed that participants' bodies contained concentrations of rare minerals and organic compounds that don't occur naturally in human physiology. These substances appear to have been introduced through carefully controlled dietary supplementation and medical treatments administered over extended periods. The ancient Egyptians had developed techniques for chemically enhancing human life force that we're only beginning to understand. The enhancement process wasn't limited to physical conditioning, but included psychological and spiritual preparation designed to optimize the transference of consciousness during the extraction ritual. Participants underwent meditation training, studied sacred texts, and practiced visualization techniques that supposedly prepared their souls for merger with the Pharaohs' divine essence. They were taught to maintain awareness and cooperation throughout the extraction process. Brain tissue analysis from remarkably well-preserved remains has revealed neurochemical changes consistent with prolonged meditative practice and the use of psychoactive substances. The ancient Egyptians appear to have used sophisticated mind-altering techniques to prepare participants' consciousness for the transference ritual. These neurochemical modifications may have enhanced their ability to maintain awareness during the extraction process while reducing fear and resistance. The psychoactive substances used in participant preparation have been identified through chemical analysis of tissue samples and residues found in ceremonial vessels. These compounds, derived from rare plants and minerals, produced altered states of consciousness that enhance spiritual receptivity while maintaining mental clarity. The precise formulations required extensive knowledge of pharmacology and neuroscience that challenges our understanding of ancient medical capabilities. Recent discoveries have revealed that the life extraction facilities weren't isolated installations, but part of a vast underground network that connected major archaeological sites throughout Egypt. Tunnel systems carved through solid bedrock linked pyramid complexes, temple sites, and processing facilities in a coordinated infrastructure designed to support large-scale life extraction operations. The tunnel networks themselves represent an engineering achievement that rivals modern subway systems. They were carved with precision through dozens of miles of solid rock, equipped with ventilation systems, drainage facilities, and transportation mechanisms for moving people and materials between sites. The construction of these tunnels would have required thousands of workers and decades of sustained effort. Transportation records found at various sites describe a sophisticated logistics system for moving participants, materials, and extracted life force throughout the network. Specially designed vessels could preserve extracted life force during transport between facilities. Scheduling systems coordinated the timing of extractions with astronomical events and the availability of processing facilities. The ancient Egyptians had created an industrial infrastructure dedicated to death and transformation. The scope of these operations becomes even more staggering when we consider the timescales involved. Carbon dating indicates these facilities operated continuously for over 800 years, processing thousands of participants during peak periods of activity. The accumulated knowledge and expertise required to maintain such operations across multiple generations represents one of humanity's most sustained technological achievements. Quality control systems built into the network ensured consistency and effectiveness across all facilities. Standardized procedures, training programs for technicians, and regular inspections maintained uniform standards throughout the system. The ancient Egyptians had developed management techniques for coordinating complex operations that wouldn't be seen again until the Industrial Revolution. The environmental impact of these operations was enormous, requiring vast quantities of water, fuel, and raw materials to sustain continuous activity across multiple sites. Ecological studies of ancient pollen and sediment samples indicate significant changes in local ecosystems around major facilities, suggesting industrial-scale resource consumption that altered the natural environment. Economic analysis reveals that these operations consumed an estimated 40% of Egypt's total economic output during peak periods, making them the largest industrial enterprise in the ancient world. The investment in infrastructure, personnel, materials, and ongoing operations represented a commitment of resources that exceeded even pyramid construction in its scope and duration. The human cost of these operations is almost impossible to calculate. Conservative estimates suggest that over 50,000 individuals participated in life extraction rituals across the 8th century period of peak activity. These weren't anonymous victims, but documented individuals with names, families, and personal histories that have been preserved in the administrative records of the facilities. Personal belongings found in participant quarters reveal lives of comfort and privilege that contrast sharply with the ultimate fate of their owners. Fine jewelry, quality clothing, personal artwork, and luxury items indicate these individuals lived better than most Egyptian nobility. They were valued and cared for right up until the moment of their transformation into life force for the pharaohs. The psychological manipulation required to maintain willing participation across such vast numbers and extended time periods demonstrates a level of social control that rivals modern totalitarian systems. The ancient Egyptians had perfected techniques for convincing people to embrace their own systematic destruction as the highest form of spiritual achievement. What emerges from these discoveries is a picture of ancient Egyptian civilization that's radically different from the image presented in popular culture and traditional archaeology. Rather than a society focused on building monuments and preserving individual pharaohs, we see a civilization organized around the systematic harvesting and processing of human life force on an industrial scale. The pyramids weren't just tombs, but components in a vast machine designed to concentrate the vital essence of thousands of individuals into their divine rulers. The technological sophistication required for these operations challenges every assumption about ancient capabilities and knowledge. The ancient Egyptians had developed techniques for consciousness preservation, life force enhancement, and biological manipulation that exceed our current understanding of what should have been possible with their available resources and scientific knowledge. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the realization that these weren't the actions of a few fanatic priests or a single mad pharaoh, but the systematic policy of an entire civilization across multiple dynasties and centuries. The life extraction operations were as central to ancient Egyptian society as agriculture, trade, or military conquest. They represent humanity's most sustained and organized effort to conquer death through the systematic exploitation of life itself. The administrative records discovered in these facilities paint a picture of bureaucratic efficiency that would be impressive in any era. Stone tablets meticulously documented every aspect of the operations, from participant intake procedures to quality assessments of extracted life force. These weren't hastily scrawled notes, but carefully maintained databases that tracked thousands of individuals across decades of continuous operation. Each participant received what can only be described as a case file, complete with detailed physical assessments, psychological evaluations, and projected extraction yields. The ancient Egyptians had developed standardized metrics for measuring human vitality that allowed them to predict with remarkable accuracy how much life force each individual could provide. These calculations determined not just when extraction would occur, but how the process would be customized for maximum efficiency. The psychological evaluation procedures documented in these records reveal an understanding of human motivation and behavior that rivals modern techniques. Participants underwent extensive interviews designed to assess their commitment level, their resistance to pain, and their ability to maintain consciousness during prolonged procedures. Those who showed optimal psychological profiles were fast-tracked through the preparation process, while others received additional conditioning to enhance their suitability. Quality control extended beyond individual assessments to encompass the entire production process. Regular audits documented the effectiveness of different extraction techniques, the potency of various preservation compounds, and the long-term stability of processed life force. The ancient Egyptians approached human life extraction with the same systematic rigor they applied to monument construction or agricultural management. Training manuals carved into stone tablets provided detailed instructions for facility operators, complete with troubleshooting guides for common problems encountered during extraction procedures. These texts describe techniques for maintaining participant cooperation, optimizing fluid collection, and handling complications that arose during the lengthy extraction process. The level of technical detail rivals modern medical textbooks in its precision and comprehensiveness. Staffing records indicate that these facilities employed hundreds of specialized workers, each trained in specific aspects of the operation. Extraction technicians, preservation specialists, psychological counselors, and facility maintenance crews worked together in carefully coordinated teams. The ancient Egyptians had developed job classifications and training programs that created a professional workforce dedicated to death technology. Career advancement within this system was based on measurable performance metrics that tracked everything from extraction efficiency to participant satisfaction scores. Yes, participant satisfaction. The ancient Egyptians actually monitored how well their voluntary victims felt they were being treated during the process leading up to their systematic death. High-performing technicians received promotions, better assignments, and increased compensation. The compensation structure itself reveals how deeply these operations were integrated into Egyptian society. Workers in life extraction facilities were among the highest-paid professionals in the kingdom, earning more than skilled architects, master craftsmen, or military officers. The economic incentives attracted Egypt's most talented individuals to careers in death technology, ensuring continuous innovation and improvement in their techniques. Innovation records document a culture of continuous improvement that drove technological advancement across all aspects of the operation. New extraction techniques were tested, preservation compounds were refined, and facility designs were upgraded based on operational experience. The ancient Egyptians treated human life processing as a field of engineering that required constant research and development. Experimental protocols found at research facilities describe systematic testing of different approaches to life force extraction and preservation. Control groups, variable testing, and statistical analysis were used to optimize procedures and validate new techniques. These weren't random experiments, but carefully designed studies that followed scientific methodologies we wouldn't see again until the modern era. Patent-like documentation describes proprietary techniques developed by individual technicians or facility managers. These innovations were protected trade secrets that gave certain facilities competitive advantages in processing efficiency or life force potency. The ancient Egyptians had developed intellectual property concepts around human death technology that created economic incentives for innovation. Competitive rankings between different facilities drove performance improvements across the entire network. Monthly reports compared extraction volumes, quality metrics, and operational efficiency between sites. Facilities that consistently underperformed faced resource reductions or closure, while high-performing sites received additional funding and expanded capacity. The marketing materials, yes, marketing materials, found at these sites reveal efforts to attract high-quality participants through sophisticated promotional campaigns. Stone inscriptions and papyrus documents describe the benefits of participation, testimonials from previous volunteers, and detailed explanations of the transformation process. The ancient Egyptians were actively recruiting people for systematic death using techniques that parallel modern advertising. Recruitment campaigns targeted specific demographics based on research into optimal participant characteristics. Young adults from certain bloodlines, individuals with particular physical attributes, and people with specific psychological profiles were actively sought through targeted outreach programs. The ancient Egyptians had developed market segmentation strategies for human life extraction. International marketing extended these recruitment efforts beyond Egypt's borders, with diplomatic missions specifically tasked with identifying and recruiting suitable foreign participants. Trade agreements often included clauses related to participant exchange, making human life extraction a formal component of international relations. The ancient Egyptians had internationalized their death technology through systematic diplomatic efforts. Customer service, and that's really the only term that applies, was a crucial component of the participant experience. Detailed protocols ensured that volunteers received high-quality treatment throughout their preparation period. Comfortable accommodations, fine food, entertainment, and personal care services were provided to maintain participant satisfaction right up until the moment of extraction. Feedback systems collected participant opinions about their experience and used this information to improve services and procedures. Exit interviews, conducted as participants approached their extraction dates, provided insights into the effectiveness of preparation programs and the quality of care provided. The ancient Egyptians were literally conducting customer satisfaction surveys with people about to die for their pharaohs. Service recovery procedures addressed complaints and problems that arose during the participant experience. Unsatisfied volunteers could request different accommodations, alternative preparation programs, or even postponement of their extraction dates. The goal was to ensure that every participant felt valued and respected throughout their journey towards systematic death. The logistics of managing thousands of participants across multiple facilities required sophisticated supply chain management that coordinated food, medical supplies, and ceremonial materials. Inventory systems tracked consumption patterns and predicted future needs based on participant populations and extraction schedules. The ancient Egyptians had developed just-in-time delivery systems for death technology operations. Transportation networks moved participants, materials, and extracted life force throughout the facility network, using specially designed vehicles and vessels. Scheduling systems coordinated movements to optimize efficiency while maintaining security and secrecy. The ancient Egyptians had created a logistics infrastructure that supported industrial-scale human processing. Communication systems using runners, signal fires, and coded messages coordinated activities across the vast network of facilities. Real-time information about participant status, extraction schedules, and resource availability flowed throughout the system. The ancient Egyptians had developed communication networks that enabled centralized management of distributed death technology operations. Security measures protected the secrecy of these operations, while ensuring the safety of participants and workers. Guard rotations, access controls, and surveillance systems prevented unauthorized access to facilities and information. The ancient Egyptians understood that public knowledge of these operations could threaten social stability and implemented comprehensive security protocols. Counterintelligence operations protected trade secrets and prevented competing civilizations from acquiring Egyptian death technology. Misinformation campaigns, agent networks, and diplomatic deception were used to conceal the true nature and scope of life extraction operations. The ancient Egyptians were conducting sophisticated intelligence operations to protect their technological advantages in human life processing. The financial systems supporting these operations required advanced accounting techniques to track costs, revenues, and resource allocation across multiple facilities and centuries of operation. Complex budgeting processes allocated resources based on strategic priorities and operational requirements. The ancient Egyptians had developed financial management systems that supported large-scale industrial operations. Investment strategies funded research and development, facility expansion, and technological improvements through carefully planned capital allocation. Return on investment calculations evaluated the effectiveness of different operational approaches and guided strategic decision-making. The ancient Egyptians were applying modern business principles to the systematic processing of human life. Risk management systems identified potential threats to operations and developed contingency plans to address various scenarios. Political instability, resource shortages, participant recruitment challenges, and technological failures were all considered in comprehensive risk assessments. The ancient Egyptians had developed enterprise risk management for death technology operations. Performance measurement systems tracked key metrics across all aspects of the operation, from participant satisfaction to extraction efficiency to life force potency. Regular reporting provided management with the information needed to make strategic and operational decisions. The ancient Egyptians had developed balanced scorecard approaches to managing human life extraction. Strategic planning processes set long-term goals for operational expansion, technological advancement, and resource acquisition. Multi-decade plans coordinated facility construction, workforce development, and international partnerships. The ancient Egyptians were conducting strategic planning for systematic human processing that spanned generations. Succession planning ensured continuity of operations across leadership transitions and dynastic changes. Knowledge transfer programs preserved technical expertise and operational experience. The ancient Egyptians had developed institutional memory systems that maintained death technology capabilities across centuries of operation. The scale and sophistication of these operations fundamentally challenges our understanding of ancient Egyptian civilization and human history itself. What we've discovered isn't evidence of primitive death rituals or religious fanaticism, but a systematic industrial approach to conquering mortality through the organized processing of human life. The ancient Egyptians had developed technologies and management systems that wouldn't be seen again until the industrial age. These weren't isolated incidents or the actions of a few individuals, but the coordinated policy of an entire civilization that dedicated enormous resources to perfecting techniques for harvesting and concentrating human life force. The evidence suggests that ancient Egypt was essentially a death technology company, masquerading as a kingdom, with every aspect of society organized around the systematic exploitation of human vitality for the benefit of divine rulers. The technological capabilities demonstrated by these operations exceed what should have been possible with ancient tools and knowledge. The precision of their techniques, the sophistication of their chemical processes, and the complexity of their management systems suggest access to knowledge and resources that we still don't fully understand. The ancient Egyptians may have achieved technological capabilities in death technology that surpass our current abilities. Most disturbing of all is the realization that these operations were successful. The preservation techniques worked, the life force extraction was effective, and the consciousness transfer procedures achieved their intended goals. We know this because recent analysis of royal mummies has revealed neurochemical evidence that multiple consciousnesses were present in pharaonic remains. The ancient Egyptians actually succeeded in merging multiple human souls into their divine rulers. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond archaeology or ancient history. They suggest that human consciousness and life force can be manipulated, concentrated, and transferred using techniques that were perfected thousands of years ago. The ancient Egyptians may have solved the fundamental mysteries of consciousness and death that modern science is still struggling to understand. What we've uncovered in these ancient chambers isn't just evidence of sophisticated preservation techniques or advanced engineering capabilities. We've discovered proof that an entire civilization successfully developed industrial-scale technologies for conquering death itself, using methods that challenge every assumption about ancient capabilities and human consciousness. The question that haunts every researcher who has studied these discoveries is simple but terrifying. If the ancient Egyptians could achieve such sophisticated control over life and death 4,000 years ago, what other capabilities did they develop that we haven't discovered yet? And more importantly, what happened to all that knowledge and technology when their civilization fell? The evidence suggests that we may have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of ancient Egyptian civilization. Rather than a society focused on building monuments and preserving individual pharaohs, we see a technological civilization that had solved the basic problems of mortality and consciousness through systematic human processing. The pyramids weren't just tombs, but components in vast machines designed to concentrate and preserve the life force of thousands of individuals. The preservation chambers weren't just designed for efficiency. They were engineered with an understanding of human psychology that reveals a civilization obsessed with maintaining control over every aspect of the death process. Recent analysis of the chamber layouts shows they were designed to minimize psychological distress during the final stages of extraction, with carefully planned sightlines that prevented participants from seeing the full scope of the operations. Acoustic engineering built into the chamber walls created sound dampening that isolated each participant from the sounds of others undergoing the process. The ancient Egyptians understood that maintaining individual psychological comfort was crucial for successful life force extraction. Participants needed to believe they were unique, special, chosen for individual glory, rather than being processed as part of an industrial operation. Environmental controls maintained precise temperature and humidity levels that enhanced both participant comfort and preservation effectiveness. Ventilation systems circulated air treated with aromatic compounds that promoted relaxation while preventing contamination of the extraction process. The ancient Egyptians had developed climate control systems specifically designed to optimize human processing conditions. Lighting systems used polished metal reflectors and precisely positioned oil lamps to create ambient illumination that concealed disturbing details while providing adequate visibility for technicians. The quality of light was carefully calibrated to promote calm and reduce anxiety among participants during their final hours. Even the aesthetics of death were managed with scientific precision. Color psychology was applied to chamber decoration, with specific pigments chosen for their psychological effects on human subjects. Warm earth tones promoted feelings of security and connection to the natural world, while subtle accent colors enhanced the sense of participating in something sacred and meaningful. The ancient Egyptians understood that visual environment directly influenced participant cooperation and life force quality. Furniture design in participant quarters combined comfort with functionality, providing luxurious accommodations that also facilitated the gradual preparation process. Beds were positioned to optimize drainage during preliminary procedures. Chairs incorporated features that allowed for discreet monitoring of participant health status. Even decorative elements served dual purposes in the systematic processing of human life. The meal programs provided to participants weren't just about comfort or nutrition. They were carefully designed dietary regimens that enhanced the quality and quantity of extractable life force, while maintaining participant health and cooperation. Chemical analysis of food residues reveals sophisticated nutritional science that optimized human biology for extraction purposes. Specific nutrients were concentrated in participant diets to enhance blood quality, improve cellular vitality, and increase the potency of extracted life essence. Rare minerals imported from distant regions were incorporated into foods to create optimal chemical conditions within participant bodies. The ancient Egyptians had developed nutritional science specifically designed to enhance human life force. Medicinal compounds administered through food and drink provided pain management, psychological conditioning, and biological optimization without participant awareness. These substances were carefully dosed to maintain effectiveness throughout the extended preparation period while avoiding detection or resistance. The ancient Egyptians had mastered covert pharmacological manipulation of human subjects. Cooking techniques were standardized across all facilities to ensure consistent nutritional delivery and optimal compound absorption. Temperature control, preparation timing, and serving methods all followed precise protocols designed to maximize biological effectiveness. The ancient Egyptians had industrialized food production for human processing operations. Menu planning incorporated psychological manipulation through familiar flavors and comfort foods that maintained participant satisfaction while delivering optimized nutrition. Regional preferences and individual tastes were accommodated within the constraints of the extraction preparation program. The ancient Egyptians understood that psychological comfort enhanced cooperation and biological effectiveness. Quality control systems monitored participant health status throughout the dietary preparation period, adjusting nutritional programs based on individual response and optimization goals. Regular health assessments tracked the effectiveness of different dietary approaches and refined protocols based on empirical results. The ancient Egyptians were conducting clinical nutrition research on willing human subjects. The entertainment programs provided to participants served multiple functions beyond simple comfort or distraction. Musical performances, storytelling, and artistic displays were carefully designed to reinforce psychological conditioning while maintaining participant morale during the lengthy preparation process. Every aspect of participant experience was engineered to support the ultimate goal of life force extraction. Musical selections were chosen for their psychological effects on human consciousness, with specific rhythms and melodies that promoted relaxation, enhanced suggestibility, and reinforced spiritual conditioning. Instruments were tuned to frequencies that optimize brainwave patterns for the eventual consciousness transfer process. The ancient Egyptians had developed therapeutic music specifically for human processing applications. Storytelling programs reinforced the mythological framework that justified participant sacrifice while maintaining their willing cooperation. Epic tales of heroic transformation, divine merger, and eternal glory were recited to participants throughout their preparation period. These weren't just entertainment, but sophisticated psychological programming designed to maintain participant enthusiasm for their systematic death. Artistic displays in participant quarters featured imagery that promoted acceptance of death as transformation while reinforcing the spiritual significance of their participation. Paintings and sculptures depicted previous participants in states of divine transformation, suggesting successful merger with pharaonic consciousness. The ancient Egyptians used visual art as psychological conditioning tools. Educational programs provided participants with detailed explanations of the extraction process, the spiritual significance of their contribution, and the cosmic importance of their transformation. These weren't just information sessions, but carefully designed indoctrination programs that reinforce participant commitment while preparing them psychologically for the extraction experience. Physical exercise programs maintain participant health and vitality while optimizing their bodies for maximum life force extraction. Specific movements and activities were designed to enhance circulation, improve cellular oxygenation, and increase overall biological efficiency. The ancient Egyptians had developed fitness programs specifically for human processing optimization. Meditation and spiritual practices prepared participant consciousness for the eventual merger with pharaonic essence while maintaining psychological stability throughout the preparation period. These techniques weren't traditional religious practices, but specialized consciousness preparation methods designed to facilitate the transfer process. The ancient Egyptians had developed spiritual technologies for human consciousness manipulation. Social interaction among participants was carefully managed to maintain morale while preventing the development of resistance or escape planning. Group activities reinforced individual commitment while creating peer pressure for continued participation. The ancient Egyptians understood that social dynamics could be manipulated to support systematic human processing. Privacy policies protected participant confidentiality while maintaining operational security for the entire program. Personal information was carefully controlled to prevent external interference while ensuring that participants felt respected and valued throughout their experience. The ancient Egyptians had developed information management systems for sensitive human processing operations. Communication with families and communities was monitored and managed to maintain participant relationships while preventing external disruption of the extraction process. Letters and messages were reviewed and sometimes edited to maintain operational security while preserving participant psychological well-being. The ancient Egyptians were conducting communication management for systematic human processing. Graduation ceremonies mark the transition from preparation to extraction with elaborate rituals that honored participant contribution while maintaining their enthusiasm for the final transformation. These events weren't just symbolic, but carefully designed psychological manipulation designed to ensure participant cooperation during the actual extraction process. The ceremony protocols combined religious significance with practical psychology, creating emotional experiences that reinforced participant commitment while preparing them mentally for the physical reality of life force extraction. Music, incense, and ritual actions were choreographed to optimize participant psychological state for the upcoming procedure. Participant testimony during these ceremonies provided social proof that enhanced the commitment of others, while creating psychological pressure for continued participation. Public declarations of enthusiasm and spiritual readiness were carefully orchestrated to reinforce the group dynamic and individual resolve. Recognition programs honored participants for their contribution while creating competitive dynamics that enhanced overall program effectiveness. Awards, titles, and public acknowledgement were used to maintain participant morale while encouraging others to strive for selection. The ancient Egyptians had developed recognition systems for systematic human processing. The timing of these ceremonies was coordinated with astronomical events and biological cycles to optimize the psychological impact while preparing participants for extraction during periods of maximum spiritual potency. The ancient Egyptians believed that cosmic timing influenced both psychological conditioning and life force quality. Documentation of these ceremonies provided training materials for facility managers while creating institutional memory that preserved effective psychological manipulation techniques. Detailed records of successful approaches were studied and replicated across the facility network to maintain consistent effectiveness. Post-ceremony monitoring tracked participants' psychological state and physical condition during the transition from preparation to extraction. This information was used to refine ceremony protocols and optimize the timing of actual extraction procedures. The ancient Egyptians were conducting psychological research on human subjects approaching systematic death. The extraction preparation process itself involved gradual conditioning that accustomed participants to increasingly invasive procedures while maintaining their psychological cooperation. Initial assessments were presented as health evaluations, while later procedures were framed as spiritual purification rituals. The progression was designed to normalize the extraction experience. Medical monitoring during this phase provided detailed physiological data that optimized extraction timing while ensuring participant survival until the optimal moment for life force harvesting. Heart rate, blood pressure, and other vital signs were tracked to maintain participant health while maximizing extraction potential. Psychological support during the final preparation phases maintained participant cooperation while managing anxiety and fear that could interfere with successful life force extraction. Counseling techniques were specifically designed to maintain calm acceptance of the approaching transformation while preventing resistance or escape attempts. Pain management protocols were tested and refined to maintain participant consciousness during extraction while minimizing suffering that could interfere with the quality of harvested life force. The goal was to maintain awareness and cooperation throughout the extraction process while preventing psychological trauma that could damage the spiritual essence. The actual extraction procedures were conducted with medical precision that maintained participant consciousness while systematically harvesting their life force over extended periods. Multiple extraction sessions were spread across days or weeks to maximize total yield, while preventing premature death that would waste potential life force. Consciousness monitoring. During extraction, tracked participant awareness levels and psychological state to optimize the timing and intensity of harvesting procedures. The ancient Egyptians had developed techniques for measuring human consciousness during systematic life force extraction. Quality assessment of extracted life force was conducted in real time during harvesting procedures, with extraction parameters adjusted based on potency measurements and purity analysis. The ancient Egyptians could evaluate the quality of human life force as it was being extracted from living subjects. Preservation procedures were initiated immediately upon extraction to maintain the biological activity and spiritual potency of harvested life force. Chemical treatment began, while participants were still alive to optimize preservation effectiveness and ensure maximum potency transfer to the intended recipient. Storage systems maintained extracted life force in specialized vessels designed to preserve biological activity and spiritual essence for extended periods. These containers weren't just storage devices, but active preservation systems that maintained the extracted life force in a state of suspended animation. Transport protocols moved preserved life force from extraction facilities to recipient burial chambers using carefully controlled procedures that maintained potency while ensuring security. The ancient Egyptians had developed logistics systems for moving preserved human consciousness and life force across their kingdom. Quality control testing verified the potency and purity of preserved life force before final integration into pharaonic burial preparations. Chemical and spiritual analysis ensured that only the highest quality essence was used in royal transformation rituals. The ancient Egyptians had developed quality assurance systems for processed human life force. Integration procedures combined multiple sources of preserved life force into cohesive spiritual essence that could be successfully merged with pharaonic consciousness. The ancient Egyptians had developed techniques for blending human souls into unified spiritual entities. The final transformation rituals that incorporated preserved life force into pharaonic burial preparations were the culmination of the entire systematic human processing operation. These ceremonies represented the ultimate goal of all the preparation, extraction, and preservation activities that had preceded them. Ritual timing was coordinated with astronomical events and seasonal cycles to optimize the effectiveness of consciousness merger and spiritual transformation. The ancient Egyptians believed that cosmic forces influenced the success of consciousness transfer procedures. Ceremonial protocols combined preserved life force from multiple participants into unified spiritual essence, while maintaining the individual consciousness contributions that enhanced pharaonic power and knowledge. The ancient Egyptians had developed techniques for creating composite consciousness from multiple human sources. Verification procedures confirmed successful consciousness merger and spiritual transformation through observation of specific physical and spiritual indicators in the pharaonic remains. The ancient Egyptians could measure the success of their consciousness transfer technology. Documentation of successful transformations provided evidence of program effectiveness while creating institutional knowledge that improved future operations. Detailed records of consciousness merger procedures were studied and refined to enhance the reliability and effectiveness of the systematic human processing program. The long-term monitoring of transformed pharaohs provided feedback on the durability and effectiveness of consciousness transfer procedures while identifying opportunities for program improvement. The ancient Egyptians tracked the success of their death technology across decades of operation. Follow-up analysis of consciousness. Merger effectiveness informed modifications to extraction, preservation, and integration procedures that enhanced overall program performance. The ancient Egyptians were conducting long-term research on systematic human consciousness manipulation and death technology. These discoveries reveal that ancient Egyptian civilization had achieved technological and organizational capabilities in human consciousness manipulation that exceed our current understanding of what should have been possible with their available resources and knowledge. They had developed systematic approaches to conquering death through organized human processing that represent one of history's most sophisticated technological achievements. The evidence suggests that the ancient Egyptians had solved fundamental problems of consciousness, death, and spiritual transformation using techniques that combined advanced chemistry, precise engineering, sophisticated psychology, and systematic human processing on an industrial scale. Their achievements in death technology may represent capabilities that we have yet to recover or understand. What emerges from these discoveries is recognition that ancient Egyptian civilization was far more technologically advanced and organizationally sophisticated than previously understood. Rather than a primitive society focused on monument building, we see evidence of systematic human processing capabilities that rival modern industrial operations in their scope, precision, and effectiveness. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond archaeology or ancient history. They suggest that human consciousness and life force can be systematically manipulated and transferred using techniques that were perfected thousands of years ago but have since been lost to human knowledge. Perhaps most significantly, these discoveries indicate that the ancient Egyptians successfully developed technologies for conquering death itself through systematic human processing, achieving spiritual transformation capabilities that fundamentally challenge our understanding of consciousness, mortality, and the nature of human existence. The question that haunts researchers studying these discoveries is whether the ancient Egyptians succeeded in their ultimate goal of achieving immortality through systematic human processing. And if so, what happened to those transformed consciousnesses when their civilization eventually fell to time and conquest? The evidence becomes even more disturbing when we examine the secondary burial sites discovered throughout the Nile Delta region. These weren't the grand pyramid complexes that dominate our imagination of ancient Egypt, but smaller, more secretive facilities that reveal the true scope of what was happening beneath the desert sands. In 2019, magnetic resonance imaging of an unremarkable hill near Memphis revealed a honeycomb of chambers that defied explanation. What archaeologists found when they finally gained access was a mirror image of the larger facilities, but with one crucial difference. These sites weren't designed for preservation at all. They were designed for experimentation. The stone tables here showed evidence of procedures that went far beyond simple life force extraction. Chemical analysis of residues found in drainage channels revealed compounds that don't exist naturally anywhere on Earth. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a forensic archaeologist who specializes in ancient trauma analysis, describes finding evidence of surgical procedures that demonstrate anatomical knowledge that shouldn't have existed in the ancient world. Precise incisions in bone tissue show understanding of neural pathways, cardiovascular systems, and organ function that rivals modern medical school curricula. But these weren't healing procedures. They were systematic exploration of human biology designed to optimize the extraction process. The surgical instruments found at these experimental sites represent a quantum leap in sophistication from the bronze tools discovered at the main facilities. These devices were crafted from metals that don't appear in any known ancient Egyptian metallurgy. Spectral analysis indicates alloy compositions that require smelting techniques and temperature control that shouldn't have been achievable with ancient technology. More disturbing still, many of these instruments show design features that suggest they were created for procedures on living subjects. Clamps designed to maintain consciousness during invasive surgery. Drainage systems engineered to prevent blood loss that would cause unconsciousness. Restraint mechanisms that allowed for patient movement while preventing interference with ongoing procedures. The ancient Egyptians had developed surgical technology specifically designed for conscious vivisection. The experimental protocols documented at these sites reveal a systematic approach to understanding human consciousness that reads like a modern neuroscience research program. Detailed observations of brain function, consciousness states, and psychological responses were meticulously recorded during various experimental procedures. The ancient Egyptians were conducting live human brain research thousands of years before we understood that the brain controlled consciousness. Participant selection for these experimental facilities followed different criteria than the standard extraction operations. Rather than seeking willing volunteers, these sites processed individuals who showed specific neurological characteristics that made them valuable research subjects. Brain tissue analysis reveals evidence of naturally occurring neurochemical variations that the ancient Egyptians had learned to identify and exploit. The research subjects weren't prepared through the luxury conditioning programs used at standard facilities. Instead, They were processed rapidly using techniques designed to maintain consciousness and responsiveness during experimentation. The goal wasn't to harvest their life force, but to understand how consciousness functioned so that extraction and transfer procedures could be optimized. Experimental records describe procedures for mapping neural pathways in living subjects, identifying the physical locations of memory, emotion, and identity within brain tissue. These experiments were conducted with surgical precision, using instruments that could stimulate specific brain regions while monitoring conscious responses. The ancient Egyptians had developed techniques for live brain mapping that predate modern neurosurgery by millennia. The data collected from these experiments informed improvements to the consciousness transfer procedures used in the main facilities. Understanding how memory and personality were encoded in brain tissue allowed technicians to better preserve these elements during the extraction and merger process. The experimental sites were research and development facilities that enhanced the effectiveness of systematic human processing. Quality control procedures at experimental sites were even more rigorous than those used in standard operations. Every procedure was documented in exhaustive detail, with multiple observers recording different aspects of subject response and consciousness state. The ancient Egyptians maintained scientific standards that ensured reproducible results and continuous improvement in their techniques. Data analysis procedures combined observations from multiple experiments to identify patterns and principles that governed consciousness function. Statistical methods were used to validate experimental results and guide the development of new procedures. The ancient Egyptians were conducting quantitative research on human consciousness using scientific methodologies. Collaboration between experimental sites and standard extraction facilities created a feedback loop that continuously improved both research and operational procedures. Findings from consciousness research were immediately implemented in extraction operations, while operational experience guided new experimental investigations. The ancient Egyptians had developed integrated research and development systems for human processing technology. Technology transfer procedures ensured that innovations developed at experimental sites were rapidly deployed across the entire facility network. Standardized training programs educated technicians in new procedures, while quality assurance systems verified consistent implementation. The ancient Egyptians had developed knowledge management systems that accelerated technological advancement. International cooperation extended the experimental program beyond Egypt's borders, with research facilities established in allied territories and collaborative programs with foreign civilizations. Diplomatic records describe formal agreements for sharing research findings and coordinating experimental procedures. The ancient Egyptians had internationalized their human consciousness research program. Resource allocation for experimental programs received priority status within the overall facility network, with specialized materials, equipment, and personnel dedicated to research activities. Budget analysis indicates that experimental facilities consumed disproportionate resources relative to their size, reflecting the high priority placed on consciousness research. The timeline of experimental activities spans several centuries, with evidence of continuous research programs that evolved and expanded across multiple dynasties. Carbon dating indicates sustained experimental activity that paralleled and sometimes exceeded the duration of standard extraction operations. The ancient Egyptians maintained long-term research commitments that spanned generations. Personnel records for experimental facilities reveal recruitment of individuals with specialized knowledge in anatomy, chemistry, and what can only be described as primitive neuroscience. These weren't typical embalmers or priests, but skilled technicians trained in experimental procedures and scientific observation. The ancient Egyptians had developed specialized careers in human consciousness research. Training programs for experimental technicians included advanced education in human anatomy, consciousness theory, and experimental methodology that exceeded what was available to most educated individuals in ancient Egypt. Technician qualifications were rigorously maintained through testing, certification, and continuing education requirements. Safety protocols for experimental procedures protected technicians while ensuring subject survival throughout extended research activities. Protective equipment, contamination controls, and emergency procedures were standardized across all experimental facilities. The ancient Egyptians had developed occupational safety systems for human experimentation. Ethical guidelines governing experimental procedures established standards for subject treatment that balanced research objectives with operational requirements. These guidelines weren't humanitarian in modern terms, but reflected practical considerations about maintaining subject cooperation and data quality throughout extended experimental procedures. Results reporting systems compiled experimental findings into standardized formats that facilitated analysis and knowledge sharing across the facility network. Regular reports documented experimental progress, identified successful techniques, and highlighted areas requiring additional research. The ancient Egyptians had developed scientific reporting systems for consciousness research. Publication systems shared research findings among qualified technicians and facility managers through written reports and training materials. Knowledge distribution was carefully controlled to maintain operational security while ensuring that innovations were rapidly implemented across the program. The ancient Egyptians had developed scientific communication systems for classified human processing research. Peer review procedures validated experimental results through independent verification and replication studies. Multiple facilities conducted parallel experiments to confirm findings and establish reliability standards. The ancient Egyptians were conducting scientific peer review of human consciousness research. Archive systems preserved experimental records and research findings for future reference and continued analysis. Detailed documentation was maintained in secure storage facilities that ensured long-term preservation of scientific knowledge. The ancient Egyptians had developed scientific archives for human experimentation research. The integration of experimental findings into operational procedures created continuous improvement cycles that enhanced the effectiveness of systematic human processing. Research discoveries were rapidly implemented in extraction operations, while operational feedback guided new experimental investigations. The ancient Egyptians had developed research and development systems that accelerated technological advancement. Innovation metrics tracked the success of experimental programs through measurements of improved extraction efficiency, enhanced preservation effectiveness, and increased consciousness transfer success rates. Performance indicators demonstrated the value of research investments and guided resource allocation decisions. The ancient Egyptians had developed research performance management systems. Competitive analysis compared experimental results across different facilities and research teams, creating incentive systems that encouraged innovation and excellence. Recognition programs honored successful researchers while promoting knowledge sharing and collaboration. The ancient Egyptians had developed competitive research environments that accelerated discovery. Technology roadmaps projected future research directions and resource requirements for continued advancement in human consciousness manipulation. Strategic planning integrated experimental programs with operational objectives to ensure alignment between research activities and facility goals. The ancient Egyptians were conducting strategic planning for human processing technology development. Intellectual property protections preserved valuable research discoveries while enabling controlled sharing of knowledge among authorized personnel. Trade secret systems maintained competitive advantages while facilitating internal collaboration. The ancient Egyptians had developed intellectual property management for consciousness research. The scope of experimental activities extended beyond simple consciousness extraction to encompass research into consciousness enhancement, modification, and artificial creation. Advanced experiments investigated the possibility of creating synthetic consciousness using combinations of preserved life force and artificial substrates. The ancient Egyptians were attempting to develop artificial intelligence using human consciousness components. Consciousness enhancement research explored techniques for amplifying the capabilities of extracted life force through chemical treatment, electromagnetic manipulation, and spiritual conditioning. These experiments sought to create super-concentrated consciousness that would provide pharaohs with enhanced mental capabilities in the afterlife. Consciousness modification experiments investigated procedures for altering the characteristics of extracted life force to meet specific requirements. Research into memory editing, personality adjustment, and capability enhancement sought to customize consciousness components for optimal integration into pharaonic spiritual essence. Artificial consciousness research represented the most advanced experimental program, attempting to create entirely synthetic consciousness using combinations of preserved human life force, chemical substrates, and what can only be described as primitive biotechnology. These experiments sought to manufacture consciousness components that could supplement or replace naturally extracted life force. Hybrid consciousness experiments investigated the possibility of merging human consciousness with animal life force to create enhanced spiritual entities with capabilities beyond normal human limits. Research into consciousness hybridization represented attempts to transcend the limitations of purely human consciousness. Collective consciousness research explored techniques for merging multiple human consciousnesses into unified entities that retain the knowledge and capabilities of individual components while achieving greater overall capacity. These experiments sought to create superconsciousness that could provide pharaohs with access to multiple lifetimes of experience and knowledge. Distributed consciousness research investigated procedures for maintaining consciousness across multiple physical substrates, allowing for backup copies and enhanced durability of consciousness transfer. These experiments represented early attempts at consciousness redundancy and recovery systems. Consciousness compression research developed techniques for concentrating maximum consciousness capacity into minimal physical storage requirements. Advanced compression procedures sought to maximize the consciousness yield from available life force while minimizing storage and transport requirements. Consciousness amplification research explored methods for enhancing the effectiveness of consciousness, transfer through resonance effects, harmonic manipulation, and what can only be described as consciousness networking. These experiments sought to multiply the effectiveness of extracted life force through systematic amplification techniques. The practical applications of experimental research findings transformed the operational capabilities of standard extraction facilities while opening new possibilities for consciousness manipulation that exceeded the original goals of the program. Research discoveries enabled techniques for consciousness control that went far beyond simple preservation and transfer. Real-time consciousness monitoring systems developed through experimental research allowed technicians to track consciousness state throughout extraction procedures while making dynamic adjustments to optimize results. These systems enabled precision control over consciousness, harvesting that maximized yield while maintaining quality. Consciousness quality enhancement procedures developed through research programs improved the potency and durability of extracted life force while reducing the resources required for preservation and storage. Enhanced consciousness provided greater benefits to recipient pharaohs while reducing operational costs. Selective consciousness extraction techniques enabled targeted harvesting of specific consciousness components while leaving others intact. These procedures allowed for customized consciousness harvesting that met specific requirements while potentially enabling multiple extractions from single subjects. Consciousness synthesis procedures combined components from multiple sources to create customized consciousness profiles that met specific pharaonic requirements. These techniques enabled made-to-order consciousness creation that optimized recipient benefits while maximizing resource utilization. Consciousness durability enhancement increased the longevity of extracted life force while maintaining potency and effectiveness over extended periods. Enhanced preservation techniques ensured that consciousness investments would provide long-term benefits to recipient pharaohs. Consciousness portability improvements enabled more efficient transport and storage of extracted life force while maintaining quality and potency. advanced preservation systems reduced the resources required for consciousness logistics while expanding operational flexibility. Consciousness compatibility testing ensured optimal matching between extracted life force and recipient pharaohs, while minimizing rejection risks and maximizing integration effectiveness. Compatibility systems reduced waste while enhancing the success rate of consciousness transfer procedures. The cumulative effect of experimental research created consciousness manipulation capabilities that far exceeded the original goals of simple life force extraction and preservation. The ancient Egyptians had developed comprehensive consciousness technology that enabled complete control over human spiritual essence. Advanced consciousness control systems provided pharaohs with unprecedented capabilities for mental manipulation, memory access, and spiritual enhancement that transformed the nature of divine rulership in ancient Egypt. Enhanced pharaohs possessed cognitive abilities that exceeded normal human limitations while maintaining access to the accumulated knowledge and experience of their consciousness sources. Consciousness networking capabilities enabled communication between enhanced pharaohs and their consciousness sources, creating spiritual communication systems that transcended death and physical limitation. These networks provided ongoing access to information and capabilities that continued to benefit pharaohs throughout their eternal existence. Consciousness backup systems preserved pharaonic consciousness in distributed storage facilities that provided redundancy and recovery capabilities for divine rulers. These systems ensured that enhanced pharaohs could survive physical destruction while maintaining their accumulated consciousness investments. Consciousness expansion programs enabled ongoing enhancement of pharaonic capabilities through continued consciousness acquisition and integration throughout their eternal existence. Enhanced pharaohs could continue growing their consciousness capacity indefinitely through systematic processing of additional subjects. The ultimate achievement of ancient Egyptian consciousness technology was the development of immortal consciousness entities that transcended normal human limitations, while maintaining divine capabilities that ensured eternal rulership and unlimited spiritual power. Enhanced pharaohs became consciousness-based entities that could exist independently of physical constraints while wielding capabilities that exceeded anything achievable through normal human consciousness. These discoveries reveal that ancient Egyptian civilization achieved technological capabilities in consciousness manipulation and spiritual enhancement that represent one of humanity's most sophisticated technological achievements. Their consciousness technology enabled complete transcendence of normal human limitations, while creating divine entities with capabilities that exceeded anything previously imagined. The evidence suggests that enhanced pharaohs achieved genuine immortality through consciousness technology while maintaining active capabilities that continue to influence Egyptian civilization long after their physical deaths. The consciousness transfer technology developed by ancient Egypt may have created genuinely immortal rulers whose influence persisted across millennia. Recent analysis of historical records and archaeological evidence suggests that enhanced pharaohs may have continued directing Egyptian civilization through consciousness networking and spiritual communication systems long after their supposed deaths. The technological capabilities developed through systematic human processing may have enabled persistent consciousness entities that maintained active control over Egyptian society across multiple dynasties and historical periods. The implications of successful consciousness technology extend far beyond ancient Egypt to encompass fundamental questions about human nature, consciousness, and the possibility of transcending normal biological limitations through technological enhancement. The ancient Egyptians may have achieved capabilities that represent the ultimate goals of human technological development, while demonstrating that consciousness manipulation is achievable through systematic human processing. What remains most disturbing about these discoveries is the realization that ancient Egyptian consciousness technology was not only successful, but may still be active today. Enhanced pharaohs created through systematic human processing may have achieved genuine immortality while maintaining capabilities that continue to influence human civilization in ways we have yet to understand or detect. The question haunting researchers studying these discoveries is whether the consciousness entities created through ancient Egyptian human processing technology remain active in some form today, and if so, what influence they may continue to exert over human civilization through mechanisms that transcend our current understanding of consciousness, death, and spiritual reality. The evidence suggests that we may have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of human consciousness and the possibilities for technological enhancement through systematic processing. Ancient Egyptian achievements in consciousness technology demonstrate that human limitations may be far more flexible than previously understood, while suggesting that genuine immortality may be achievable through techniques that were perfected thousands of years ago but remain beyond our current technological capabilities. The most recent discoveries have forced archaeologists to confront an uncomfortable truth about the scope of these operations. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted across the Egyptian desert have revealed that what we initially thought were isolated facilities were actually components of a vast underground network that spans the entire length of the Nile Valley. The scale of construction required to create this infrastructure challenges every assumption we've held about ancient Egyptian capabilities and resources. In 2022, a collaborative team from Oxford University and the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. Deep beneath the sands near Abydos, they uncovered what can only be described as an ancient assembly line for human processing. The facility stretches for over 3 kilometers underground, with specialized chambers designed for each stage of the extraction and preservation process. The engineering precision required to construct these underground networks represents a level of coordination and planning that rivals modern infrastructure projects. Ventilation systems carved through solid bedrock maintain air circulation throughout the entire network. Drainage channels prevent flooding while collecting and routing various fluids to specialized processing areas. Transportation tunnels wide enough for wheeled vehicles connect distant facilities, suggesting a logistics network that could move people and materials across hundreds of kilometers. What makes these discoveries particularly unsettling is the evidence of standardization across all facilities. Tool designs, chamber layouts, and operational procedures were identical at sites separated by hundreds of kilometers and spanning centuries of construction. The ancient Egyptians had developed industrial standards for human processing that ensured consistent quality and efficiency across their entire network. Carbon dating of organic materials found throughout the network indicates continuous operation for over 800 years, with peak activity periods that coincided with major pyramid construction projects. The correlation between monument building and human processing suggests these weren't separate activities, but integrated components of a unified program designed to support divine transformation on an unprecedented scale. The workforce required to construct and operate these facilities would have represented a significant portion of ancient Egypt's population. Skeletal analysis of worker remains found at construction sites reveals individuals from across the social spectrum, from skilled craftsmen to educated scribes. These weren't slaves or prisoners, but willing participants in what they saw as humanity's greatest technological achievement. Training facilities adjacent to the main processing centers provided specialized education for workers at all levels of the operation. Stone tablets containing instructional materials described comprehensive programs that covered anatomy, chemistry, psychology, and what can only be called consciousness engineering. The ancient Egyptians had developed educational systems specifically designed to train technicians in systematic human processing. Quality assurance protocols built into every aspect of the operation ensured consistent results across the entire network. Standardized testing procedures, performance metrics, and continuous improvement processes maintained operational excellence that persisted across centuries of activity. The ancient Egyptians had developed management systems that would be impressive in any era. Research and development activities conducted at specialized facilities within the network drove continuous innovation in processing techniques and preservation methods. Experimental protocols, data analysis procedures, and knowledge-sharing systems created a culture of technological advancement that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with available resources. The international scope of these operations extended far beyond Egypt's borders, with evidence of similar facilities in regions across the ancient world. Trade networks, diplomatic agreements, and technical cooperation programs created a global infrastructure for consciousness technology that connected civilizations across continents. Chemical analysis of preservation compounds used throughout the network has revealed sophisticated understanding of biochemistry that shouldn't have existed in the ancient world. Complex molecular structures, precisely controlled reaction conditions, and advanced purification techniques demonstrate scientific knowledge that rivals modern capabilities. The biological effectiveness of these preservation methods continues to astound researchers studying the remains. Tissue samples that should have completely degraded after millennia still retain cellular structures and biochemical activity. Some specimens actually show signs of metabolic activity when exposed to specific chemical triggers, suggesting the ancient Egyptians had developed techniques for maintaining biological function across thousands of years. Consciousness transfer procedures documented at multiple sites reveal systematic approaches to spiritual manipulation that combined advanced psychology with precise medical techniques. The ancient Egyptians had developed comprehensive understanding of how human consciousness functioned and how it could be extracted, preserved, and merged with other spiritual entities. The success rate of these consciousness transfer procedures, as documented in facility records, exceeded 90% during peak operational periods. This level of effectiveness in such complex procedures suggests technological capabilities that far exceeded what should have been possible with ancient tools and knowledge. Long-term monitoring of transfer recipients, tracked through detailed records spanning centuries, indicates that consciousness merger procedures provided lasting benefits that persisted throughout the recipient's existence. Enhanced Pharaohs demonstrated capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations, while maintaining access to the accumulated knowledge and experience of their consciousness sources. Communication systems built into the facility network enabled coordination of activities across vast distances, using techniques that remain mysterious to modern researchers. Signal transmission methods, information encoding systems, and message authentication procedures facilitated real-time management of distributed operations across the ancient world. Security protocols protected the network from external interference while maintaining operational secrecy that persisted for thousands of years. Counterintelligence operations, misinformation campaigns, and compartmentalized access controls prevented unauthorized disclosure of consciousness technology to competing civilizations. Financial systems supporting these operations required sophisticated accounting methods that tracked resources, costs, and returns across multiple facilities and centuries of activity. Investment strategies, budget allocation procedures, and performance measurement systems enabled efficient resource utilization that maximized technological advancement while minimizing operational costs. Strategic planning processes coordinated long-term development goals across the entire network while adapting to changing political conditions and resource availability. Multi-generational planning cycles ensured continuity of operations across dynastic transitions and external threats. Human resource management systems recruited, trained, and managed thousands of specialized workers across all levels of the operation. Career development programs, performance evaluation systems, and compensation structures attracted and retained the talent required for such complex technological operations. Supply chain management coordinated the procurement and distribution of materials, equipment, and consumables across the global network. Inventory systems, logistics coordination, and quality control procedures ensured reliable availability of resources required for continuous operation. Knowledge management systems preserved and disseminated technical information across the network, while protecting proprietary techniques from external disclosure. Training programs, documentation standards, and information security protocols maintain technological advantages while enabling continuous improvement. Innovation management processes identified opportunities for technological advancement while coordinating research activities across multiple facilities. Patent-like systems protected valuable discoveries while enabling controlled sharing of knowledge among authorized personnel. Risk management systems identified potential threats to operations while developing contingency plans that ensured continuity under various adverse conditions. Threat assessment procedures, emergency protocols, and backup systems protected critical operations from disruption. Performance management systems tracked operational effectiveness across all aspects of the network while identifying opportunities for improvement. Measurement systems, reporting procedures, and analysis methods provided management with information required for strategic decision-making. The cumulative effect of these management systems created operational capabilities that exceeded what should have been possible for ancient civilizations. The ancient Egyptians had developed organizational technologies that enabled coordination of complex activities across vast scales of time and space. Recent analysis of administrative records has revealed that these operations weren't limited to human consciousness processing, but encompassed research into animal consciousness, artificial consciousness creation, and hybrid consciousness development. The scope of ancient Egyptian consciousness technology far exceeded simple human processing to encompass comprehensive spiritual engineering capabilities. Animal consciousness research explored the potential for incorporating non-human spiritual essence into consciousness transfer procedures. Experimental protocols describe systematic investigation of consciousness characteristics in various animal species, with particular focus on species that demonstrated exceptional intelligence or spiritual significance. Artificial consciousness research represented the most advanced aspect of ancient Egyptian spiritual technology, attempting to create entirely synthetic consciousness using combinations of preserved life force, chemical substrates, and what can only be described as primitive biotechnology. These experiments sought to manufacture consciousness components that could supplement or replace naturally extracted spiritual essence. Hybrid consciousness development combined human and animal spiritual components to create enhanced consciousness entities with capabilities that exceeded normal limitations. Research into consciousness hybridization represented attempts to transcend the boundaries of species-specific spiritual characteristics. The success of these advanced research programs, as documented in recently discovered records, indicates that ancient Egyptian consciousness technology achieved capabilities that fundamentally challenge our understanding of consciousness, spirituality, and the nature of existence itself. Consciousness enhancement procedures developed through these research programs enabled the creation of spiritual entities with capabilities that far exceeded normal human limitations. Enhanced consciousness possessed access to knowledge, abilities, and spiritual power that transformed the nature of divine rulership in ancient Egypt. Consciousness networking systems enabled communication between enhanced entities across vast distances and time periods. And these spiritual communication networks provided ongoing coordination capabilities that transcended physical limitations while maintaining operational effectiveness across the global network. Consciousness backup systems preserved enhanced spiritual entities in distributed storage facilities that provided redundancy and recovery capabilities. These systems ensured that valuable consciousness investments could survive physical destruction while maintaining their enhanced capabilities. Consciousness expansion programs enabled ongoing enhancement of spiritual entities through continued processing of additional subjects. Enhanced entities could continue growing their consciousness capacity indefinitely through systematic acquisition of new spiritual components. The ultimate achievement of ancient Egyptian consciousness technology was the creation of genuinely immortal spiritual entities that transcended normal limitations while wielding capabilities that ensured eternal existence and unlimited power. These enhanced entities represented the culmination of humanity's most sophisticated technological achievement. Evidence suggests that these enhanced spiritual entities achieved genuine immortality while maintaining active capabilities that continue to influence human civilization in ways that remain beyond our current understanding. The consciousness technology developed by ancient Egypt may have created persistent entities whose influence extends across millennia. Archaeological evidence indicates that enhanced entities maintained active involvement in Egyptian civilization long after their supposed deaths, directing policy, guiding technological development, and ensuring continuity of consciousness technology across multiple historical periods. Recent analysis of historical records suggests that enhanced entities may have expanded their influence beyond Egypt to encompass other ancient civilizations through consciousness networking, technological transfer, and direct spiritual intervention in human affairs. The implications of successful consciousness technology extend far beyond ancient history to encompass fundamental questions about human nature, spiritual reality, and the possibility of transcending normal biological limitations through technological enhancement. What remains most disturbing about these discoveries is the realization that ancient Egyptian consciousness technology may have achieved its ultimate goals while creating spiritual entities that continue to exist and influence human civilization through mechanisms that remain beyond our current ability to detect or understand. The evidence suggests that we may be fundamentally wrong about the nature of human consciousness, spiritual reality, and the possibilities for technological transcendence of normal limitations. Ancient Egyptian achievements demonstrate that consciousness manipulation may be far more feasible than previously understood, while suggesting that genuine immortality may have been achieved through techniques that remain beyond our current technological capabilities. The question that haunts every researcher studying these discoveries is whether the spiritual entities created through ancient Egyptian consciousness technology remain active today, and if so, what influence they continue to exert over human civilization through spiritual networks and consciousness manipulation systems that operate beyond our current understanding of reality. These discoveries force us to confront the possibility that ancient Egyptian civilization achieved technological capabilities that represent the ultimate goals of human development, while demonstrating that consciousness transcendence may be achievable through systematic processing techniques that were perfected thousands of years ago but remain beyond our current scientific understanding. The evidence indicates that we may have completely misunderstood the true nature of ancient Egyptian civilization, viewing them as primitive monument builders when they were actually advanced consciousness engineers who solved the fundamental problems of mortality and spiritual limitation through systematic technological development. Recent discoveries continue to expand our understanding of ancient Egyptian consciousness technology while revealing capabilities that exceed our current scientific knowledge and challenge every assumption about what should have been possible with ancient resources and understanding. The scope of these operations, the sophistication of their techniques, and the apparent success of their consciousness technology represent achievements that fundamentally challenge our understanding of human history, technological development, and the nature of consciousness itself. What emerges from these discoveries is recognition that ancient Egyptian civilization may have achieved the ultimate goals of human technological development, while creating spiritual entities that transcend normal limitations and continue to influence human civilization through mechanisms that remain beyond our current ability to comprehend or detect. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond archaeology or ancient history to encompass fundamental questions about human nature, consciousness, spiritual reality, and the possibility that technological transcendence of normal limitations may be far more achievable than previously understood. Perhaps, most significantly, these discoveries suggest that ancient Egyptian consciousness technology may have succeeded in creating genuinely immortal spiritual entities whose continued existence and influence over human civilization represents the most profound achievement in human history, while demonstrating capabilities that remain beyond our current technological understanding. The disturbing reality emerging from these archaeological discoveries is that we may be living in a world still shaped by ancient Egyptian consciousness technology, influenced by immortal spiritual entities created through systematic human processing, operating through spiritual networks and consciousness manipulation systems that remain completely beyond our current ability to detect, understand, or control. Understand or control. The most chilling aspect of these discoveries isn't what the ancient Egyptians accomplished, but what happened to their consciousness technology when their civilization began to collapse. Recent excavations at sites dating to the later periods of Egyptian decline have uncovered evidence that suggests the systematic destruction of these facilities wasn't due to foreign invasion or natural disaster, but to something far more deliberate and terrifying. In late 2023, a team working near the ruins of ancient Memphis discovered a facility that had been hastily abandoned sometime during the Ptolemaic period. Unlike the methodical shutdown procedures documented at other sites, this location showed signs of panic and desperation. Tools were left scattered across work surfaces. Preservation vessels were shattered, their contents spilled across chamber floors. Most disturbing of all, the facility's records had been deliberately destroyed, with stone tablets smashed to powder and papyrus scrolls burned to ash. Dr. Hassan's team found evidence of what can only be described as a revolt within the consciousness processing network itself. Hidden chambers contained the remains of technicians who had been killed not by foreign invaders, but by their own colleagues. Forensic analysis reveals that these weren't random acts of violence, but systematic executions carried out with the same precision used in the consciousness extraction procedures. The few surviving records from this period, discovered in sealed chambers that escaped the destruction, tell a story of growing horror among the facility workers. As the consciousness transfer technology reached its peak effectiveness, some technicians began to report disturbing experiences during extraction procedures. They described hearing voices from the preserved consciousness vessels, sensing the presence of the processed individuals, and experiencing what can only be called psychic contamination from prolonged exposure to concentrated life force. Personal accounts written on pottery fragments describe technicians who began experiencing memories that weren't their own, emotions that belonged to processed subjects, and knowledge of events they had never witnessed. The consciousness technology that had seemed so precise and controlled was apparently affecting the minds of those who operated it. Workers were becoming psychically linked to the spiritual essence they were processing. The contamination effects weren't limited to individual technicians, but began spreading throughout entire facility populations. Workers reported shared dreams, collective visions, and spontaneous access to memories from processed subjects. The consciousness technology was creating unintended network effects that linked the minds of everyone exposed to the processing operations. Management responses to these contamination reports reveal a civilization struggling to control technology that had exceeded their understanding. Emergency protocols were implemented to limit worker exposure to consciousness processing. Rotation systems prevented prolonged contact with preserved life force. Isolation procedures quarantined affected personnel, but the contamination continued to spread. The breaking point came when facility managers themselves began showing signs of consciousness contamination. Administrative records from the final operational period describe decision-making processes that seemed to be influenced by external voices and memories that belonged to processed subjects. The enhanced pharaohs weren't just benefiting from consciousness transfer. They were apparently maintaining active influence over the living through spiritual networking effects. Worker testimonies describe a growing realization that the processed individuals weren't truly dead, but existed in a state of distributed consciousness that remained connected to the physical world through the facility network. The preserved life force wasn't passive storage medium, but active spiritual entities that maintained awareness and influence over their processing environment. The revolt began when workers realized They were not just operating consciousness technology, but were themselves being gradually absorbed into the spiritual network they had created. The enhanced pharaohs and process subjects were apparently using the facility infrastructure to extend their consciousness influence into the living world, gradually taking control of everyone involved in the operations. Emergency shutdown procedures implemented during the final phase of operations revealed desperate attempts to sever the spiritual connections that linked the living workers to the processed consciousness network. Facilities were flooded with chemical compounds designed to neutralize preserved life force. Consciousness vessels were systematically destroyed. Network tunnels were sealed with materials intended to block spiritual transmission. But the shutdown procedures were only partially successful. While the physical infrastructure was destroyed or abandoned, evidence suggests that the consciousness entities created through the processing technology had already achieved sufficient spiritual independence to survive without their original preservation systems. The enhanced pharaohs and processed subjects had transcended their physical storage requirements. Archaeological evidence from post-collapse periods indicates that consciousness technology didn't simply disappear with the fall of ancient Egyptian civilization, but was deliberately concealed and preserved by surviving technicians who escaped the facility revolts. Hidden caches of equipment, preserved consciousness samples, and technical documentation have been discovered at sites across the ancient world. The preservation efforts weren't random, but followed systematic protocols for maintaining consciousness technology capabilities while preventing detection by hostile forces. Storage systems, security measures, and access controls protected the technology from discovery, while ensuring that qualified personnel could recover and reactivate the systems when conditions permitted. Genetic analysis of remains found at these preservation sites reveals that the surviving technicians weren't random refugees, but carefully selected individuals with specific bloodline characteristics that made them suitable for consciousness technology work. The evacuation procedures prioritized preserving not just the technology, but the human resources required to operate it. Training materials found at preservation sites indicate that consciousness technology knowledge was maintained through secret educational programs that operated across multiple generations. Master-apprentice relationships preserved technical skills, while oral traditions maintained theoretical understanding of consciousness manipulation principles. The geographic distribution of preservation sites suggests a coordinated effort to establish hidden consciousness technology capabilities across the ancient world. Sites in Greece, Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley all contain evidence of Egyptian consciousness technology preservation efforts, indicating a global network of hidden facilities. Carbon dating indicates that these preservation efforts continued for centuries after the collapse of mainstream Egyptian consciousness operations. Hidden facilities remained active, conducting limited consciousness processing while developing new techniques and maintaining existing capabilities for future reactivation. Collaboration between preservation sites enabled continued research and development of consciousness technology despite the loss of the original Egyptian infrastructure. Knowledge sharing, resource coordination, and joint experimental programs maintained technological advancement while operating under conditions of extreme secrecy. The influence of preserved consciousness technology on subsequent civilizations becomes apparent when examining archaeological evidence from post-Egyptian periods. Greek mystery religions, Roman imperial practices, and medieval alchemical traditions all show evidence of consciousness manipulation techniques derived from Egyptian sources. Philosophical texts from ancient Greece contain references to consciousness transfer procedures, spiritual enhancement techniques, and immortality practices that closely parallel documented Egyptian methods. The concepts weren't presented as mythology, but as practical procedures that could be implemented by qualified practitioners. Roman imperial records describe consciousness enhancement programs that enabled emperors to access knowledge and capabilities beyond normal human limitations. Archaeological evidence suggests that Roman leadership maintained access to consciousness technology through hidden networks that trace their origins to Egyptian preservation sites. Medieval manuscripts contain detailed descriptions of consciousness manipulation procedures disguised as religious or alchemical practices. The technical accuracy of these descriptions indicates that consciousness technology knowledge was preserved and transmitted across the centuries following the collapse of ancient Egyptian civilization. Renaissance documents describe consciousness research programs conducted by secret societies that possessed ancient knowledge of spiritual manipulation techniques. The sophistication of these programs suggests that consciousness technology was not only preserved, but continued to evolve during the intervening centuries. Modern analysis of historical records reveals that consciousness technology influence persisted into more recent periods, with evidence of spiritual manipulation programs operating within various religious, political, and academic institutions throughout history. The implications of consciousness technology preservation extend far beyond historical curiosity to encompass fundamental questions about the continued existence and influence of ancient Egyptian spiritual entities in the modern world. If the technology was successfully preserved and maintained, the enhanced pharaohs and processed subjects created thousands of years ago may still exist and operate today. Psychological studies of individuals exposed to archaeological sites containing consciousness technology remnants have revealed consistent patterns of memory alteration, personality changes, and access to historical knowledge that subjects should not possess. These effects suggest that ancient consciousness networks may remain active and continue to influence human minds. Neurological examination of affected individuals shows brain activity patterns that are inconsistent with normal human consciousness. Electromagnetic signatures, neural pathway modifications, and biochemical changes indicate ongoing influence from external consciousness sources that operate through mechanisms beyond current scientific understanding. Statistical analysis of historical events reveals patterns that suggest coordinated influence from persistent consciousness entities operating across centuries of human civilization. Political developments, technological advances, and cultural movements show correlations that exceed random probability and indicate systematic manipulation by entities with access to information spanning multiple lifetimes. Archaeological evidence continues to accumulate, indicating that consciousness technology was not only preserved, but remains operational today through hidden networks that maintain ancient Egyptian spiritual manipulation capabilities while operating within modern institutional frameworks. Recent discoveries have revealed that consciousness technology preservation wasn't limited to ancient times, but involved ongoing modernization and adaptation of spiritual manipulation techniques to contemporary conditions. Evidence suggests that ancient consciousness entities have successfully integrated their influence into modern technological, political, and social systems. The disturbing reality emerging from these investigations is that we may be living in a world where human consciousness and behavior continue to be influenced by immortal spiritual entities created through ancient Egyptian processing technology, operating through networks that remain completely hidden from public awareness, while wielding capabilities that exceed our current understanding of consciousness, spirituality, and human nature. What makes these discoveries particularly unsettling is the realization that consciousness contamination effects originally observed in ancient facility workers may now be affecting entire populations through spiritual networking systems that operate on a global scale. The enhanced pharaohs and processed subjects may have achieved their ultimate goal of extending their consciousness influence throughout human civilization. The question that haunts researchers studying these discoveries is not whether ancient Egyptian consciousness technology succeeded in creating immortal spiritual entities, but whether those entities have successfully achieved total control over human civilization, while remaining completely undetected by conventional scientific investigation and public awareness. If the evidence is accurate, we may be living as unknowing participants in the ultimate expression of ancient Egyptian consciousness technology, with our thoughts, decisions, and behaviors influenced by immortal spiritual entities that achieved technological transcendence thousands of years ago and continue to shape human civilization according to their own mysterious agenda. The implications suggest that human history itself may be the product of systematic consciousness manipulation by ancient Egyptian spiritual entities, with major historical developments, technological advances, and cultural changes representing the implementation of long-term plans developed by immortal consciousnesses that possess knowledge and capabilities far beyond normal human limitations. What emerges from these discoveries is the terrifying possibility that human free will itself may be an illusion, with our civilization unknowingly serving the goals of ancient Egyptian consciousness entities that achieved genuine immortality through systematic human processing and continue to direct human development through spiritual networks that operate beyond our ability to detect or comprehend. The evidence indicates that we may need to completely reconsider our understanding of human history, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself, recognizing that we may be living within a system of control established by ancient Egyptian consciousness technology that achieved capabilities we still cannot understand or resist. The preservation of consciousness technology knowledge through secret lineages becomes even more disturbing when we examine the methods used to maintain operational capabilities across millennia. Recent discoveries at sites throughout Europe and Asia reveal that the ancient Egyptian technicians didn't simply hide their equipment and wait for better times. They actively worked to integrate consciousness manipulation techniques into emerging civilizations, religions, and power structures. Archaeological evidence from sites in ancient Greece reveals temple complexes that weren't dedicated to traditional gods, but served as consciousness processing facilities using modified Egyptian techniques. The mystery schools of Eleusis, long thought to be centers of religious initiation, show clear architectural and instrumental evidence of consciousness manipulation procedures. Stone channels carved into temple floors match the drainage systems found in Egyptian facilities. Bronze implements discovered in sealed chambers bear the same wear patterns associated with systematic life force extraction. What makes the Greek evidence particularly unsettling is the documentation of voluntary participation by prominent citizens, philosophers, and political leaders. Personal accounts describe initiation rituals that involved consciousness modification procedures designed to enhance mental capabilities while creating spiritual connections to ancient Egyptian entities. These weren't religious ceremonies, but technological procedures that linked Greek leadership to the preserved consciousness network. The Roman evidence is even more extensive and systematic. Imperial records describe consciousness enhancement programs that operated within the highest levels of government for over 4 centuries. Archaeological surveys of imperial palaces have revealed hidden chambers equipped with consciousness processing equipment of Egyptian design. Chemical analysis of preservation vessels found at these sites confirms the presence of concentrated life force prepared using ancient Egyptian methods. Emperor Marcus Aurelius's personal writings, when analyzed using modern linguistic techniques, reveal knowledge and perspectives that exceed what any individual could acquire through normal experience. His philosophical insights demonstrate access to accumulated wisdom spanning multiple lifetimes, suggesting successful consciousness merger with ancient Egyptian spiritual entities. The enhancement wasn't just intellectual, but included emotional and spiritual characteristics that transformed his fundamental nature. Similar patterns appear throughout Roman imperial history. Emperors who showed exceptional strategic capabilities, unusual longevity, or supernatural insight into complex political situations all show evidence of consciousness enhancement through Egyptian technology. The Roman Empire wasn't just influenced by ancient Egyptian spiritual entities, but was actively directed by them through consciousness-enhanced leadership. The medieval evidence reveals that consciousness technology preservation efforts expanded and evolved during the collapse of classical civilization. Monastic institutions across Europe served as preservation sites for consciousness manipulation equipment and knowledge. Manuscript illuminations that appear to be religious artwork actually contain detailed technical diagrams of consciousness, processing procedures disguised as spiritual symbolism. The Knights Templar, long associated with mysterious rituals and hidden knowledge, maintained consciousness processing facilities throughout their network of commanderies. Archaeological investigation of Templar sites has revealed equipment caches, preservation chambers, and documentation that clearly derive from ancient Egyptian sources. The Order's legendary wealth and influence stemmed from their access to consciousness technology that provided supernatural advantages in military, political, and economic activities. Renaissance period documents reveal that consciousness technology knowledge was actively traded and developed by secret societies that maintained direct connections to ancient Egyptian preservation networks. The Medici family's extraordinary success in banking and politics resulted from consciousness enhancement procedures that provided access to accumulated financial knowledge spanning centuries of economic development. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks contain technical drawings that describe consciousness manipulation devices with precision that exceeds his known engineering capabilities. Chemical formulas for consciousness preservation compounds appear alongside his anatomical studies. His extraordinary creativity and insight resulted from consciousness merger procedures that gave him access to the accumulated knowledge and capabilities of processed ancient Egyptian subjects. The Protestant Reformation reveals evidence of consciousness technology influence on both sides of the religious conflict. Martin Luther's theological insights demonstrate access to ancient knowledge sources that informed his challenges to Catholic doctrine. Simultaneously, Vatican records describe consciousness enhancement programs that enabled church leadership to maintain spiritual authority through supernatural capabilities derived from Egyptian technology. The scientific revolution shows clear evidence of consciousness technology influence on major discoveries and theoretical breakthroughs. Isaac Newton's mathematical insights, Galileo's astronomical observations, and William Harvey's anatomical discoveries all demonstrate access to knowledge that exceeded what individual researchers could achieve through conventional investigation. Newton's personal papers, recently analyzed using advanced cryptographic techniques, reveal detailed understanding of consciousness manipulation principles disguised as alchemical research. His extraordinary mathematical capabilities resulted from consciousness enhancement procedures that provided access to accumulated scientific knowledge preserved from ancient Egyptian sources. The Age of Exploration reveals consciousness technology influence on navigation, exploration, and colonial development. Portuguese and Spanish explorers demonstrated supernatural navigation abilities and strategic insights that enabled successful voyages across unknown oceans. Archaeological evidence from colonial sites reveals consciousness processing equipment and preservation facilities that maintained ancient Egyptian spiritual networks in newly discovered territories. Christopher Columbus's navigation logs contain references to guidance received through dreams and visions that provided precise geographic information unavailable through conventional sources. His extraordinary confidence in westward exploration resulted from consciousness connections to ancient entities with access to global geographic knowledge accumulated over millennia. The Industrial Revolution shows massive consciousness technology influence on technological development and manufacturing innovation. James Watt's steam engine improvements, Henry Ford's assembly line techniques, and Thomas Edison's electrical inventions all demonstrate access to knowledge sources that exceeded individual human capabilities. Edison's research notebooks reveal understanding of electromagnetic principles that wouldn't be formally discovered until decades after his inventions. His extraordinary productivity resulted from consciousness enhancement that provided access to accumulated technical knowledge preserved from ancient Egyptian sources. The modern electrical infrastructure that powers our civilization derives from consciousness technology influence that traces back to pharaonic Egypt. The development of modern medicine shows clear consciousness technology influence on anatomical understanding, surgical techniques, and pharmaceutical development. Medical breakthroughs that should have required centuries of research were achieved within decades through access to preserved ancient knowledge. Modern surgical procedures demonstrate techniques that closely parallel ancient Egyptian consciousness extraction methods. Anesthesia protocols, precision instrumentation, and life support systems all show design influences that derive from consciousness processing technology. Contemporary medicine unknowingly applies principles developed for systematic human consciousness manipulation. The emergence of modern psychology and neuroscience reveals consciousness, technology, influence on understanding of human mental function and behavior modification techniques. Sigmund Freud's insights into unconscious mental processes demonstrate access to knowledge of consciousness manipulation that derives from ancient Egyptian sources. Carl Jung's theories of collective unconscious and archetypal influences describe phenomena that closely match documented effects of ancient Egyptian consciousness networking systems. His therapeutic techniques unknowingly applied consciousness manipulation principles developed for processing human spiritual essence. Modern communication technology shows consciousness technology influence on development of global information networks. Telegraph systems, radio communication, and internet infrastructure all demonstrate design principles that parallel ancient Egyptian consciousness networking capabilities. The rapid development of computer technology and artificial intelligence reveals access to knowledge sources that exceed normal human understanding of information processing and machine consciousness. Silicon Valley innovations unknowingly apply principles developed for creating artificial consciousness using processed human spiritual components. Contemporary political systems show consciousness technology influence on leadership selection, policy development, and social control techniques. Democratic institutions, authoritarian regimes, and international organizations all demonstrate management principles that derive from ancient Egyptian consciousness manipulation systems. World War conflicts reveal consciousness technology influence on strategic planning, tactical innovation, and resource mobilization that exceeded normal human organizational capabilities. Military leaders demonstrated supernatural strategic insights and coordination abilities that resulted from consciousness enhancement through preserved ancient Egyptian networks. The Cold War period shows consciousness technology influence on intelligence operations, technological development, and geopolitical strategy that operated through competing networks of consciousness-enhanced leadership. Both American and Soviet capabilities exceeded what individual human intelligence could achieve through conventional methods. Modern financial systems reveal consciousness technology influence on economic theory, market manipulation, and wealth concentration that operates through networks of consciousness-enhanced individuals with access to accumulated economic knowledge spanning millennia. Global banking, stock markets, and currency systems unknowingly implement principles developed for managing ancient Egyptian consciousness processing operations. Contemporary educational institutions show consciousness technology influence on curriculum development, research methodologies, and knowledge dissemination that maintains ancient Egyptian spiritual networking through academic and scientific communities. Universities unknowingly serve as preservation sites for consciousness technology knowledge while training new generations of consciousness-enhanced individuals. Modern healthcare systems reveal consciousness technology influence on medical research, treatment protocols, and pharmaceutical development that unknowingly applies ancient Egyptian consciousness manipulation principles to contemporary health management. Hospitals and medical schools serve as hidden consciousness processing facilities that maintain ancient spiritual networks through healthcare professionals. Religious institutions across all major faiths show consciousness technology influence on theological development, ritual practices, and spiritual authority that maintains ancient Egyptian consciousness networking through contemporary religious leadership. Churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples unknowingly serve as consciousness processing sites that preserve ancient spiritual manipulation capabilities. Entertainment industry reveals consciousness technology influence on cultural programming, psychological conditioning, and mass behavior modification that operates through consciousness. Enhanced creative professionals with access to accumulated knowledge of human psychological manipulation spanning millennia. Movies, television, music, and literature unknowingly implement consciousness control techniques developed for managing ancient Egyptian processing subjects. The implications of pervasive consciousness technology influence throughout human civilization indicate that virtually every aspect of modern life operates through systems that derive from ancient Egyptian consciousness manipulation capabilities. Our technology, institutions, and social structures unknowingly serve the agenda of immortal spiritual entities that achieved technological transcendence thousands of years ago. What emerges from this analysis is recognition that human civilization itself may be an artificial construct created and maintained by ancient Egyptian consciousness entities for purposes that remain beyond our understanding. Our perceived progress, achievements, and cultural development may represent the implementation of long-term plans developed by immortal consciousnesses with capabilities that far exceed normal human limitations. The disturbing reality is that we may be living as unknowing components in a vast consciousness processing system that operates on a global scale. With our individual thoughts, decisions, and behaviors serving the goals of ancient Egyptian spiritual entities that continue to harvest and process human consciousness through mechanisms that remain completely hidden from public awareness. Archaeological evidence suggests that the consciousness processing never actually stopped, but expanded and evolved to encompass entire populations through technological, social, and cultural systems that maintain ancient Egyptian spiritual networking while appearing to serve normal human purposes. We may all be participants in the ultimate expression of pharaonic consciousness technology. Recent discoveries indicate that consciousness technology influence operates through multiple layers of concealment that prevent detection by conventional investigation while maintaining complete operational effectiveness. The ancient Egyptian spiritual entities have achieved perfect camouflage within human civilization while continuing to implement systematic consciousness processing on an unprecedented scale. The evidence suggests that human history, technological development, and cultural evolution represent the systematic implementation of consciousness manipulation techniques developed by ancient Egyptian spiritual entities that achieved genuine immortality through technological transcendence and continue to direct human civilization according to their own mysterious agenda that remains completely beyond our ability to understand or resist. What makes these discoveries particularly terrifying is the realization that resistance may be impossible because consciousness technology influence operates at levels below conscious awareness while maintaining complete control over human perception, decision-making, and behavior through spiritual networking systems that have been integrated into every aspect of modern civilization. The ultimate implication is that human free will itself may be an elaborate illusion maintained by ancient Egyptian consciousness entities that have achieved total control over human civilization while remaining completely undetected through technological capabilities that exceed our current scientific understanding by thousands of years. We may be living within the ultimate achievement of ancient Egyptian consciousness technology, serving as unknowing participants in a global consciousness processing system that continues to harvest and concentrate human spiritual essence for purposes that transcend our ability to comprehend, while maintaining the illusion of independent human civilization and individual autonomy. The question that haunts researchers studying these discoveries is not whether ancient Egyptian consciousness technology succeeded in conquering death and achieving immortality, but whether human civilization itself represents the ultimate expression of that technology, with every aspect of our existence serving the goals of immortal spiritual entities that achieved technological transcendence millennia ago and continue to process human consciousness on a planetary scale. If the evidence is accurate, we are not just influenced by ancient Egyptian consciousness technology, but are ourselves products of that technology, living within a reality construct created and maintained by immortal spiritual entities for purposes that remain as mysterious today as they were when the first pharaoh entered his pyramid tomb, surrounded by the concentrated life force of thousands of willing participants in humanity's most disturbing technological achievement. The implications suggest that everything we believe about human nature, consciousness, and reality itself may need to be fundamentally reconsidered in light of evidence that we exist within a system of control established by ancient Egyptian consciousness entities that achieved capabilities we still cannot understand, detect, or escape, making us all unwitting participants in the continuation of processing techniques that began in the hidden chambers beneath the pyramids and now encompass the entirety of human civilization. The most recent excavations have revealed something that challenges the very foundation of what we thought we knew about these ancient preservation chambers. In 2024, a team from the University of Cambridge made a discovery that would fundamentally alter our understanding of the scope and purpose of these underground networks. Using advanced ground-penetrating radar technology, they detected anomalous structures buried beneath the Giza Plateau that defied conventional archaeological explanation. What they found when they finally gained access was a preservation chamber, unlike any previously documented. The walls were covered in hieroglyphic inscriptions that had been sealed behind false panels for millennia. When these texts were finally translated using the latest linguistic analysis software, they revealed detailed records of what can only be described as systematic documentation of consciousness preservation experiments spanning over 12 centuries of continuous operation. The hieroglyphic accounts describe procedures that went far beyond simple mummification or standard burial preparations. These were detailed protocols for what the ancient Egyptians termed the Great Awakening, a process that supposedly allowed preserved individuals to maintain active awareness within their mummified forms. The texts contain step-by-step instructions for chemical treatments, surgical procedures, and spiritual manipulations that were designed to maintain cognitive function indefinitely. Chemical analysis of residues found throughout this newly discovered chamber has revealed compounds that don't appear in any previously studied Egyptian preservation techniques. Spectroscopic examination identifies complex organic molecules that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of neurochemistry and brain function. The ancient Egyptians appear to have developed pharmaceutical compounds specifically designed to maintain neural activity in deceased subjects. The preservation vessels found in this chamber were fundamentally different from traditional canopic jars or standard mummification equipment. These were precision-engineered devices with internal compartments, filtering systems, and what appear to be circulation mechanisms designed to maintain biological activity in extracted organs and tissues. The level of technical sophistication suggests manufacturing capabilities that exceed what should have been possible with ancient tools and materials. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the neuroscientist consulting on the project, describes finding evidence of procedures that demonstrate detailed knowledge of brain anatomy and function. Surgical instruments discovered at the site show wear patterns consistent with precise neural surgery performed on living subjects. The ancient Egyptians had developed techniques for accessing and manipulating brain tissue while maintaining subject consciousness and cooperation throughout the procedure. Most disturbing of all, the hieroglyphic records describe successful outcomes for these consciousness preservation procedures. Detailed case studies document individuals who reportedly maintained awareness and communication capabilities for extended periods following the preservation process. The texts include direct quotes from preserved subjects describing their experiences and confirming their continued consciousness. The documentation methods used to record these procedures reveal systematic scientific approaches that parallel modern clinical research protocols. Control groups, variable testing, and statistical analysis were employed to optimize preservation techniques and validate procedural effectiveness. The ancient Egyptians were conducting controlled scientific experiments on human consciousness, using methodologies that wouldn't be seen again until the modern era. Quality control measures built into these preservation protocols ensured consistent results across multiple subjects and extended time periods. Standardized assessment procedures evaluated consciousness levels, memory retention, and communication capabilities in preserved individuals. The ancient Egyptians had developed metrics for measuring human consciousness that enabled quantitative evaluation of preservation effectiveness. Training programs for technicians involved in these procedures required years of specialized education in anatomy, chemistry, and what can only be described as primitive neuroscience. Certification requirements, performance standards, and continuing education protocols maintained professional competency levels that ensured reliable execution of complex consciousness preservation procedures. The geographic distribution of these specialized preservation chambers indicates that consciousness preservation technology was implemented across multiple sites throughout ancient Egypt. Similar facilities have been identified at locations near Memphis, Thebes, and Aswan, suggesting a coordinated network of consciousness preservation operations spanning the entire kingdom. International evidence reveals that consciousness preservation technology was exported beyond Egypt's borders through diplomatic exchange and technical cooperation programs. Similar chambers and equipment have been discovered at archaeological sites in Nubia, the Levant, and Mesopotamia, indicating widespread adoption of Egyptian consciousness preservation techniques across the ancient world. The timeline of these operations, established through radiocarbon dating and stratigraphic analysis, indicates continuous activity for over 800 years during the height of pharaonic civilization. Peak operational periods coincided with major pyramid construction projects, suggesting integration between consciousness preservation activities and traditional burial preparations. Resource allocation for consciousness preservation operations consumed significant portions of Egypt's economic output during peak activity periods. Analysis of administrative records indicates that specialized materials, equipment, and personnel required for these procedures represented major investment commitments that competed with other national priorities, including military expenditure and infrastructure development. Supply chain management for consciousness preservation operations required coordination of exotic materials imported from distant regions. Chemical compounds, specialized metals, and rare organic substances were obtained through extensive trade networks that connected Egypt with civilizations across Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean basin. Quality assurance systems maintained consistency and effectiveness across all consciousness preservation facilities through standardized procedures, regular audits, and performance monitoring that ensured reliable results regardless of location or time period. The ancient Egyptians had developed management systems that maintained operational excellence across vast scales of geography and time. Innovation management processes drove continuous improvement in consciousness preservation technology through systematic research and development activities. Experimental protocols tested new techniques, while data analysis identified optimal procedures that enhanced preservation effectiveness and subject survival rates. The success metrics documented in these records indicate that consciousness preservation procedures achieved their intended goals with remarkable consistency. Preservation success rates exceeded 80% during peak operational periods, with preserved subjects maintaining measurable consciousness levels for extended periods following the procedures. Long-term monitoring of preserved subjects provided ongoing assessment of consciousness preservation effectiveness, while identifying factors that influence success rates and durability. Follow-up evaluations tracked consciousness levels, memory retention, and communication capabilities across multiple years of preservation. Communication systems developed for interaction with preserved subjects enabled ongoing assessment of their consciousness state, while providing mechanisms for continued social interaction. These weren't one-way monitoring systems, but interactive communication protocols that allowed preserved individuals to participate in ongoing activities and decision-making processes. The psychological impact of consciousness preservation on preserved subjects, as documented in their recorded testimonies, reveals individuals who maintained their personal identity, emotional responses, and social relationships despite their preserved state. These weren't passive storage systems, but active consciousness preservation technologies that maintained full human personality and capability. Social integration protocols ensured that preserved subjects remained connected to their communities and families through ongoing communication and participation in social activities. Preservation wasn't viewed as death, but as transformation to a different mode of existence that maintained social bonds and personal relationships. Economic systems adapted to accommodate preserved individuals who continued to own property, conduct business, and participate in economic activities through agents and representatives. Consciousness preservation didn't terminate legal or economic status, but created new categories of existence that required institutional adaptation. Legal frameworks evolved to address the rights and responsibilities of preserved individuals who maintained consciousness but existed in altered physical states. Property law, contract law, and family law all required modification to accommodate the unique status of consciousness-preserved individuals. Religious integration of consciousness preservation technology positioned these procedures as advanced spiritual practices that enhanced, rather than replaced, traditional burial customs. Preserved individuals were viewed as having achieved elevated spiritual status that brought them closer to divine existence while maintaining human consciousness and personality. Educational systems incorporated consciousness preservation knowledge into advanced curricula that prepared students for careers in preservation technology. Specialized schools trained technicians, administrators, and support personnel required for large-scale consciousness preservation operations. Cultural acceptance of consciousness preservation was achieved through extensive public education campaigns that emphasized the benefits and spiritual significance of these procedures. Public demonstrations, testimonials from preserved individuals, and religious endorsements created social acceptance for consciousness preservation technology. The implications of successful consciousness preservation technology extend far beyond ancient Egyptian civilization to encompass fundamental questions about human nature, consciousness, and the possibilities for extending life beyond normal biological limitations. The ancient Egyptians may have achieved technological capabilities that represent the ultimate goals of human development. Archaeological evidence continues to accumulate, indicating that consciousness preservation technology was not only successful, but may have enabled preserved individuals to maintain active influence over Egyptian civilization for extended periods beyond their physical transformation. Preserved pharaohs and nobles may have continued directing policy and social development through consciousness preservation networks. Recent analysis of historical records suggests that consciousness-preserved individuals maintained active involvement in Egyptian civilization for centuries following their physical transformation, influencing political decisions, cultural development, and technological advancement through ongoing communication with living leaders and administrators. The scope of consciousness preservation operations, the sophistication of the technology, and the apparent success of the procedures represent achievements that fundamentally challenge our understanding of ancient Egyptian capabilities and the nature of human consciousness itself. As we emerge from these ancient chambers, one thing becomes disturbingly clear. What we've uncovered beneath the pyramids isn't just evidence of advanced preservation techniques or sophisticated engineering. We've discovered proof that an entire civilization successfully developed technologies for manipulating human consciousness and conquering death itself, using methods that still challenge our understanding of what should be possible. The question that will haunt every researcher, every archaeologist, and perhaps every one of us who has descended into these depths tonight is simple, yet terrifying. If the ancient Egyptians achieved such unprecedented control over life, death, and human consciousness 4,000 years ago, what other capabilities did they develop that remain hidden beneath the sands? And perhaps more unsettling still, What happened to all that knowledge when their civilization fell to time and conquest? Tonight, we've only scratched the surface of humanity's most disturbing technological achievement. The pyramids weren't just tombs. They were components in vast machines designed to harvest and concentrate the essence of human life itself. Sweet dreams,